Yeah, it's been a minute.
Yeah, I think you were this big
Yeah,
last time I saw
yeah.
you.
I was probably, I mean, I don't even know. Elementary school, maybe? Middle school?
Probably middle school. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. So, how's life? How's everything going? In this, I mean, times were a lot less hectic, I think we could say the last time we saw each other.
Yeah. Life's been really great. Yeah, I don't have any complaints.
I saw you're living up in Seattle?
Yeah, I live
Okay.
in Tacoma now, which is just south of Seattle.
Oh, nice. How do you like that?
I really like it. Yeah, I've lived in a couple places in Seattle, and so I think I prefer living in Seattle a little bit more than Tacoma just because of the traffic.
Okay.
But where I live now, it's like surrounded by trees, which has been really nice.
Is Tacoma bigger then?
It's not bigger than necessarily.
But traffic's worse.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
traffic's a lot worse because
Oh,
it's
wow.
right going through Seattle. So.
Oh, wow. It was a little crazy in Seattle over all of this, no?
Yeah.
Or not bad where you were?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the pandemic's been hard in Seattle, especially just because in any large city it's hard for people to like really quarantine when you're kind of so close
Stacked
to each other.
on top of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a long couple of years. It's just been crazy.
Yeah.
And we're still going. I mean, that's all part of it, right?
Yep.
We're still going. And I did a little deep dive on your Facebook because I'm like, I didn't know what to expect. And you are, it seems, pretty involved in the Native American community.
Yeah.
Okay. You're Native American, obviously, I would assume?
Yeah, I am. I'm Haida, Tlingit, and Inupiaq.
Okay. Wow. So your dad was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow. And it looked like you were speaking at like a city council thing?
Yeah, I spoke at the King County City Council once, which was pretty cool. It was a good experience. We got to go and state what we were looking for and hoping for to work with them, and I was on the King County like a task force with them. So yeah, it was a really good experience.
What were you guys trying to address with the task force?
Gender equity and sexual orientation inclusion. And so there's just a lot of laws in the county that didn't make any sense. And so we were trying to talk to them about it and really create some recommendations around that on how the county could better address that.
Specifically for the Native American community or just for everyone?
For everyone, yeah.
What were the laws?
There's different like building codes that don't allow for like unisex bathrooms and things that make it just more accessible for folks. Different laws around like licensing and like what genders are allowed on your license plate, or like on your like your
like your driver's license?
Driver's license.
Oh,
yes,
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so different states have adopted different legislation to allow folks to be better expressed on there. So
kind of apply what they want to on there instead of just male or female.
Right.
Okay, that's cool. And did that work? Did you guys get anything pushed through? Or it's still a work in progress? They were
really supportive of it, and then the pandemic happened.
And this was pre-COVID.
Yeah, so then our task force hasn't really met since.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
Oh. So nothing really changed.
Not so far, no.
Yeah.
But, I think that they're still open to the work. I just think that they were like the people working on that task force on the King County side like were immediately switched to like COVID relief efforts and stuff. So there was still a lot of like good community outreach from their department. It just had to shift to more like, does everybody have masks? Does everyone have hand sanitizer? And just more needs there.
That's the unfortunate side of COVID, right? Is everything that was all the progress that was pre-COVID kind of got put on the back burner.
Yeah.
Because
just so many other humanitarian needs. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have to address what's going on, especially in the beginning when nobody knew what it was. You didn't really have time to look at anything else, or so we thought.
Yeah.
But I think, are they looking at it now, or are they kind of getting back to where it was, or it's still kind of on the back burner?
If they are, they haven't reached back out to me, which is fine. Like, not that they need to reach out to me to restart it, but I think that they're, sort of not going back to business as usual, but I think that they've been able to handle some of the more urgent crises and like refocus their work.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with that?
I was asked to join it. I was originally working at Chief Seattle Club, which is
I don't know what that is.
it's a Native nonprofit in Seattle that addresses Native homelessness.
Oh, wow.
Native folks are more likely to experience homelessness than most other races, especially in Seattle. So it was like a day shelter and place for folks to get food. They are just open some housing there. So that's pretty cool. And while I was working there were a lot of opportunities that I got. So I think that Seattle works really hard to be inclusive of like all different diversity and really like I think folks reach out to the Native person or organization that they know for everything. So it felt like we got asked to do or join everything, and it was way more than 1 or 10 people could even do. So I think like we all got different opportunities to really work within the county and stuff.
Was it a pretty big group of you guys working for that nonprofit?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and it's growing every day. So it's really they're opening up more and more housing in the city itself, which is amazing.
Do they know why their Native Americans are hit particularly hard with homelessness? Is it
I
just like a lack of access to resources or?
I think so, and I think that it also has a lot to do with like the historical and current trauma that Native people face. There really haven't been a lot to address different traumas, and I think um, it's also just like a lack all around. I mean, I think Native folks in Seattle make up 10% of the entire homeless population.
Oh, wow.
We make up 3% of the total population, and 10% of like the homeless population. So it's more about like different burdens that our communities are facing. Like there's an epidemic of murdered and missing Indigenous women. Native women have some of the highest rates of domestic violence. I think a lot of folks are trying to get out of bad situations. It's so many issues that I think we really face that other groups face at less high rates.
Yeah, the domestic abuse and kidnappings are pretty rampant. There's some highway in Canada that goes through a pretty desolate part of Canada, and that's the thing is it goes through all these Native American tribes and people just go missing all the time and they can't seem to get a handle on it.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things happening at play that really work against us. I think that the media is less interested in helping us. Society is less interested in helping us because of various stereotypes that they believe about us.
Stereotypes like,
I think that there's stereotypes like when someone goes to file like a missing person case, the police will ask, did they run away or this or that, or were there issues at home that they had. So I think we've seen, on a national scale, people will search the entire country for missing white women, and like really there's black and native and transgender women out there that people really aren't looking for outside of their own communities or their own families. And I think it just doesn't get the same media coverage. I don't think that people are as interested in helping us. I think that there's stereotypes of like, oh, they're just looking for handouts or this or that, like that aren't relevant at all. Native Americans are like constantly faced with the stereotype of being alcoholics, and statistics show that we actually drink less than white folks today.
oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, and it's like we have, I guess our rates are like with white folks, it's shows that we drink at similar rates when people are drinking, and that significantly higher groups of like native folks aren't drinking at all. And so it's kind of funny because we've been stereotyped at different stereotypes that don't fit us and that we can't seem to shake.
Yeah, that's a branding that's stuck, right? Is
Yeah.
that alcoholism is pretty rampant on tribal land.
And it's pretty rampant everywhere across
Yeah,
America.
that's
And
the
I think
thing,
that it's
right?
easy to like point out what's wrong in other people's communities without like looking at the unemployment rates, and without looking at like the lack of opportunities, and without looking at like you know the education systems that maybe aren't as great as other places because there aren't as many resources there. So I think that things are really changing. I think that native folks really care about education and different things, and I think we have to work twice as hard to really prove ourselves.
So, are you on? So, when being involved with the nonprofit, did that kind of awaken you to all of this, or were you pretty aware of? what had been going on in the community before then.
I think that I was always aware of what was happening, but I didn't have the firsthand experience of like really seeing this and, talking to people every day that were really struggling. And I think that that was really eye opening for me because um, I think that really working there gave me the opportunity to feel like I could help my own community in a bigger way than I had realized before. And
Is it a lack of a voice on a national stage that
I
kind of pushes that? Like this lack of resources, the lack of exposure to getting help with whether it's the homeless problem, which is rampant everywhere. I mean, especially here, the homeless population is just rampant, and I don't know if it's people not getting access to resources or if on some level it's a choice, like they just don't want to conform in that way. I mean, you hear different opinions all the time, but that and then obviously people going missing, which is a big one.
I don't think that there's any lack of a voice. I think that it's falling on deaf ears. And I think that, the United States is intentionally set up Native Americans to be very isolated and segregated on reservations. That was entirely intentional. If we're way out there, then really it's your own fault, whatever you make of it out there, like it's so separated. And I think that that's really been a struggle. And of course, there's been different, government pushes to get us off of reservations so that there can be more like land grabs and land opportunities there. And so, most Native folks today live off reservation, but I think that that the struggles are still there. And I think that there's a focus on the struggles and the trauma that make us consistently have to be resilient, consistently have to be strong, consistently have to work for each other. I think that maybe folks don't even realize that we're here. I don't know how many times I've heard, "Oh, you're Native American? That's so cool. I didn't know there were any Native people left." Or like, "Oh, well, you're not really Native, are you?" And it's like, I don't even know what that's supposed to
That's got to
mean.
be frustrating. Yeah.
Like, yes, really, really am. Like, it's frustrating, but it's also hard to always start a conversation with, "We are still here." I think that, and I think that the folks really do expect us to like want special treatment, and we don't. We want fairness, we want equality, we want equity. We want to be treated with respect and not have to consistently start every conversation with like, "Yes, we are still here," and "No, I don't speak for all of us," and like the same sort of. It's exhausting because by the time you get to the point of the conversation, you've lost half your audience because it's been 3 minutes.
Yeah. They just want to catch those clickbaity moments, right?
Yeah.
I always thought the reservation thing was kind of weird. It seems like why aren't we all just integrated together? I mean, I get it, like having a space where you can, you know, have your culture flourish in a way, which I think could be beneficial, but it's also like why aren't we just all integrated together? Why are we separating people out from the community?
Well, the government, has set aside reservations to put Native people on so that they could take their land.
Yes, back
And
in the day, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that there is a strong desire to keep, the land and the culture alive and do the best you can with where you are. And also, it's well known that the Nazis actually developed concentration camps by looking at what the United States did to Native Americans on reservations. So
I did not know that.
it's not a system that was ever designed to be for our benefit, even if that's what folks have said. And if you want any evidence, look at what Hitler did. That's really, he designed it entirely off of reservations.
Wow, how crazy is that? How many people know that? I
Well,
can't
one
imagine.
more
Yeah,
today.
one more today. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
So most people today live off the reservation.
Most Native Americans today do live off reservation.
Is why is that?
Historical reasons, current reasons. I think that there's like stereotypes of us, like never leaving the reservation. And I think folks, there are some folks who haven't, but since like, government swoops, there were pushes to get natives off reservations. Native Americans kids were stolen from their families on reservations and put in Native American boarding schools. For the last 100 years, my grandpa went to a boarding school and survived it. A lot of kids did not survive it. This is in the news all the time lately, especially in Canada. There have been over 6,500 Native kids whose bodies have been unearthed on residential school grounds, mostly in Canada. They haven't really started looking at the United States boarding schools and searching the grounds. And Native folks have always known that we have relatives there. We've always known. We heard stories, very, hard, traumatic stories. And I think folks are eager to say, like, oh, well, that's in the past. But, my grandpa wasn't that old. It's not really that far in the past. There's still lots of people alive today who experienced it. And the boarding schools were designed intentionally with the mentality of kill the Indian, save the man. It was, meant to strip us of our culture and community, and really set us up for a life of like domestic servitude to other communities. It was never designed to like help us grow as people or like educate us, so we could become successful. That really wasn't ever the goal of them. So there's been like so
Wow.
many government programs that have taken us off of the reservation by force. There were opportunities for folks to be leaving reservations and going into cities, and the government would promise like, oh, we'll set you up with housing and a job, and you and your whole family will be set up. And then they get there and there's nothing. So there's been, consistently just a tremendous amount of abuse and trauma. And because tribes have their own police force, there's a consistent, I think, lack of jurisdiction issues, and like tribes aren't always able to like enforce laws against non-native folks on their own lands, which means that like if you're not able to punish people who harm your community, then it's kind of a free-for-all, which it shouldn't be. And I think that tribes work very hard to keep their communities safe and do the best that they can. And, we do know that Native women go missing all of the time in cities and on reservations. I don't think that our community is vulnerable or more vulnerable than anyone else. I think that we're targeted. I think that we've been like really over sexualized in media, and, people have like really exoticized us to the point where we are targeted.
God, that's hard. It's hard to hear that, right?
It's much harder to live
Oh,
it.
I would imagine. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
nobody likes talking about difficult things. That's the problem, right? I would imagine that's where people tune out as they say, "Oh yeah, it was in the past, like we don't have to deal with it because
Yeah.
it's already happened, Why unearth old stones?"
I guess I think folks, especially like white folks, feel some amount of guilt around it. And like, I've had a lot of conversations with folks who will like cry about it, and that's not helpful.
Yeah, what
Like
does that do?
that's not helpful, really. Like it's important to understand history and what's happening today, because these things are still happening today. Not stealing kids to send to boarding school, thank goodness. But Native American boarding schools are still around today. But, a lot of the traumas that are happening, have happened in the past, are still happening today. And I think that, we see these things happening on the border too. And it's really a travesty. I think that if we had more open and honest conversations and dialogues about it, I think that we would be less likely to repeat history with other groups of people like we see happening to a lot of Hispanic people on the border, like, watching their kids being stripped from their parents and put in these detention centers
Yeah, the
feels,
cages
it
is
feels really reminiscent about things that, have been happening for hundreds of years to other Native groups. So I just think that really like we have to be more focused on what we can do together to prevent this from happening and heal from what has already happened.
and so if your grandfather was taken, I mean, this must have been occurring in the 50s?
He was born in 1924.
Oh, okay.
And I think that really like he is just such a miracle because he had a mom that fought so hard for him. And I think that that is how he, really survived. So he told me stories about it, and his mom once his dad passed away, moved with the kids, and she wasn't really like able to feed them on her own anymore. And so like she had three kids, and they were sent to different boarding schools. And the Haynes orphanage she tried to volunteer at, and well, she was supposed to work there. She was working there for a few months, and they never paid her. And they said that, she said that they were evil people, and like they would like hose off all of the kids, um, for shower time, like with a hose. And there's pictures of my grandpa's brother, like digging for potatoes in the garden, like, as a little kid, just like manual labor. And so she took, the kids and left and tried to find a better situation. And she was a dorm room mother at Mount Edgecombe Residential School in Alaska. But she was only allowed to visit, to watch over the boys' dorm. She had a daughter too. And I remember my aunt saying that she thinks that her mom was really struggling because she didn't get to see her mom. She would work. She worked at this boarding school where she wasn't making a lot of money, even though she could have worked elsewhere, just so that she could keep an eye on her kids and try to help out. And then when they went to high school, she ended up getting a house down the street from where they went to school so that she'd be able to see them. And on all the breaks, she said all of the kids who didn't have a place to go would come to her house and stay with her. She said she always had a full house, taking care of as many kids as possible. And my grandpa, he would tell me stories about how he was really lucky to be going to a boarding school around his community, because the teachers didn't mess with him as much as they messed with like Inuit kids who were far away from their families. They didn't have the same support system. They couldn't just go home for breaks and things like that. And those became like, the targeted kids who didn't make it.
So did your grandmother, did she enroll her kids in that as like a way that they would be taken care of where she didn't have, money for them?
I think that she didn't have any options. She
Mm-hmm.
said she didn't have any way of
Well, I
feeding.
mean, obviously, if they're
Yeah,
not paying her, how are you?
exactly. So I think that she made the best out of what she could. I know a lot of kids were sent to these boarding schools forcefully, even while my great grandma was there. But I think that for her it was just a lack of options as like a single mom of 3 kids back in the 1940s. There just wasn't a lot that she could do, and she tried to watch over her kids as best as possible, and I think that's why they made it. There's so many pictures and stories of like there's one that I'm thinking of right in front of the boarding school. There's teepees like set up there because they wanted to be as close to their kids as possible. They were starving. There's no food around there, and they still lived outside of that school just so that they could see their kids during break time. These we never came from broken homes. Our homes were broken. Our families were broken. My grandpa was one of the best human beings I've ever met in my life, and like the family structure that I think a lot of other people have, he didn't like necessarily get to experience in the same way. And it wasn't for any amount of lack of love. It's because he, from the time he was a little kid, had a very different family structure where he was like with all of these other kids, taught by truly horrible people in some cases. And he had dentures from 4th grade, he said, because they didn't ever like teach the kids to brush their teeth.
Oh, wow.
And so they said it was cheaper to pull all of their teeth as like a young kid than it was to like give them toothbrush and toothpaste. And like you can kind of see how it passes on from generations, like
In
my
4th grade.
yeah, that's what he said. And because I took him to a doctor appointment and we were sitting next to each other, and one of the questions of it was about like your teeth, and I asked him, and I was like, "Oh, when was the last time you had a cavity?" And he just pulled his dentures out and was like,
Well, still clean.
"Not in a long time."
Oh my
He
God.
said, "I've had these since 4th grade." Um,
Wow.
and you just watch this, like different traumas, and I think we try to make a lot of jokes about it. Like Native community is full of jokes all of the time. Like if you're around Native folks, they're just joking, because I think that's a really easy way to talk about hard things. And you have to to keep going. Like my grandpa, he was a very loving person and never said I love you. Like he I would always be like, "All right, love you, grandpa," and he'd be like, "Yep, you too." Like he didn't have like the same sort of family dynamic. And I think that that really, um, I think that it really messed up like my biological dad. Like even he would like end emails and stuff to me, and he'd be like, "Love you like a dad," and I was like, "That's weird. Like, why would you
Yeah,
say
it
that? Like,
says it like
that's
that.
like one of the weirdest way you could possibly say that." Like, you know,
Love you like a dad.
it was odd. And I think, he was trying to say a lot in there because he didn't raise me. And so I think he was like trying to be like, but I also think that it was like a lack of understanding of like how families were supposed to function and look. His dad was like a fisherman who wasn't there really. And, he was raised by his like great grandma for the most part. And I think that those sort of traumas, they linger on even after the kids have stopped being forcibly removed, right? Like when we think about like, oh, do native people have such high rates of X, Y, and Z? It's not that hard to see, if you know a little bit of history, because it's all relevant. Like the history that we've had has shaped us into who we are. I think even Native folks who grew up in foster care or away from Native community, they are shaped by these experiences that our community has had. And I think that the foster care systems had a huge impact on how Native people think of themselves. I think that like society, like not seeing pictures of us anywhere besides from like the 19 hundreds has made folks think that we aren't here, and we are. And I think people really are excited to see us dressed in regalia, looking like pictures back in the old days, and they're less interested to see us like really thrive looking like most other folks out here. Like our culture is still very much so alive, and it's changed. All cultures change. That's a part of it. That's a part of growing and thriving and surviving. All of it. We've had to change.
The broken home life. That's a hard subject because that carries on through generations. Like that growing up, I mean, especially if you're being taken from your family and put into foster care or put into a boarding school. I mean, I can't imagine how bad those boarding schools nowadays aren't great. And so to go back to the 20s or the 40s, it's not hard to imagine what went on there. And
Yeah.
that carries on. Like that's not
Yeah.
a one generation thing. That has a ripple effect through the family.
Right. For generations, you have a cousin, who never came home from there. Um, those stories are very much so still alive. Those stories are part of our communities and shape how we are able to really deal with different things. Um, and all of these schools, they were run by churches.
Which is not
That's
good.
definitely shaped our relationship with churches. I think that a lot of people don't understand or are reluctant to understand because it means um I think that people just don't want to be like complicit. And I think that people are like, oh, if I hear about that, then like, oh, I'm a part of it. But it's not even about that. I think nobody's guilt helps us. No, that doesn't help us at all. What does help us is like support and understanding and like, sharing out information and really just being a good ally, really caring, really wanting to do something. I think that so many people are like paralyzed with all of the woes of the world right now, especially. There's so many different tragedies happening all at the same time. And I think it's important to know about them so that you can act. I think really like our society today is just like paralyzed in a feeling of like, oh, I can't do anything, I can't. And that's not really the case. We've seen so many things change based on um like us standing together and saying this isn't going to happen anymore.
It's easy to get wrapped up in that though, right? Because if you take a macro look at it, you see all these issues, all these huge problems, and you're kind of paralyzed. It's like, how do we address this? How do we take on the breadth of what is happening here? And it's like, well, I can't. I can't change anything, so I'm not going to try. And that's what happens. People don't try. He is so chill. He keeps like putting his head on the table and I'm like, "Oh my god."
Yeah, he would love to just like run around on the
Just
table.
rub.
Yeah. He's a good puppy. I think it's easy to really get depressed or feel like you can't make a difference. And I think that it takes effort to know how to do something and also to like how to help a community that isn't yours. But I think that there's a lot of folks who are really trying to like we have all the solutions, right? You just have to like talk to us. We have things that we want done, that we want seen. We're working to find these missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. I think that there's a lot of Native folks who are, trying to stop human trafficking in our lands. And I think that it's easy to like amplify what other folks are saying. And if there's a call to action, you show up. Like really, the work is showing up for each other. If there's a call out for different things, it's really following the advice of people on the ground from this community. And I think that's true of all good social justice work. It's about showing up for each other and amplifying folks who are most impacted, making sure that they're the ones being heard. And I think even folks who aren't from the community who think that they're like experts in it, it's about not necessarily taking all of the opportunities that are offered to you because you're someone who might have more means or resources or connections. It's about making sure that people who are directly impacted get those same opportunities and means and resources so that we can all be heard.
So if somebody goes on to a reservation and commits a crime, is there how is that handled if they leave the reservation? Like if someone that's not Native American goes on and kills somebody or hurts or sexually assaults someone and then goes back off the reservation, is there any can tribal police like extradite? Is that a thing?
It's considered a federal crime. Like,
Oh,
even
okay.
if you have like weed on a reservation, you now are convicted of a felony crime.
Oh, wow.
So it's different. It's different. I think that tribal police are able to, and I'm not the expert on this.
You're
But
not a secret cop or
I'm not a
anything.
secret cop.
But that's the
you
thing, right?
know,
It's hard. I've heard that it's hard getting justice when it's on the res versus off the reservation.
it is. It is. It's more complicated because it's not like it is a different jurisdiction. You're on tribal land. Tribal cops are involved, and I think that they do their best, and I think that, it's federal crimes, so the feds get involved. So
Well, that's
I
good.
wouldn't recommend it to anyone,
Yes.
even if things are more murky out there. I think that like people have watched too many westerns and think that the reservations are like the old Wild West, and it's not like that, like at all. If anything, like people who have spent time in casinos don't realize even sometimes that they're on reservations, and that's surprising to folks. But for the most part, you are.
And so your tribe was in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where the boarding school was
Mm-hmm.
for your grandpa.
Yep.
Wow. It's just a hard thing, right? And I mean, obviously, what what do you do? What do you do when you're faced with these challenges and these communities that are having hardships? And like you said at the border, I mean, we're still seeing, the same mistakes. And I wonder if that is a historical thing that people don't look back and say, okay, we made these mistakes. Maybe we shouldn't be making them again.
It would be great if we
Ye-
stopped putting kids in cages. And I think like Biden's platform, he was like, I'm going to shut all these down.
nope.
And you're seeing more deportations than under Trump. Like, absolutely not helping any
And those
situations.
centers are still down there
Yeah,
along the border in Texas.
with the kids.
That
And it's
never
and it's
changed.
and it's still just the same amount of heinousness. Like, there's sexual abuses happening to these kids, and the people running these ICE detention camps are saying that they're not in charge of preventing that. And that's absurd. If you're watching kids, you're
You're
taking
kind of
you're
responsible.
responsible for taking care of them. You're responsible for knowing who their parents are, making sure they can contact them. It's really frustrating. And I know that a lot of Indigenous people feel such a strong connection to that because there's so many other Indigenous people south of the border. Like, these borders crossed us and we didn't cross them. And so folks are still trying to come into really what is still their homelands and not being able to. And it's, you're seeing the same violence perpetrated again and again and again. And I think it's because Americans are so reluctant to look at history and learn from it. Our history books don't even tell the truth sometimes. I mean, when you are a Native person in a Native community, you hear different truths than what our history books say. And, that's a really hard thing to know a different history than everyone around you.
Truths like regarding the creation of the reservations or
not even just that, like truths about different past presidents who were horrible to Native people. Truths about small local things, massacres that happen that everyone pretend like didn't happen, here locally. Um,
That's what happened out at Woodley Island, right?
yeah.
It was a massacre in the middle of the night.
hmm And I think that there's a lot of like intentional massacres that have happened to Native Americans, and biological warfare was just as prevalent. 90% of my tribe was killed by smallpox during a time when there was a vaccine that we weren't given. So
Oh, I didn't know that.
it's really been like a long history of whose life is worthwhile, whose life are we fighting for, which communities are we seeing as deserving of help, and which aren't.
Does it get frustrating when you look at the challenges that are being presented today and you understand that these are the same challenges that your grandfather faced in a different way? Like these problems are still here. They're not necessarily evolving. Like we're still tackling these problems.
I think that the problems have shifted. Our society's shifted. I think that we still struggle with the consequences that live on from the past. I think that the struggle's different. And I think that there is suddenly, for my community, where before being Native was something that you were really treated horribly. Like you see signs that say like no Indians and no dogs. And now I think that for some reason there's been a societal shift where a lot of folks think that like being Native is something cool all of a sudden. Um,
Does that get frustrating?
and that part's frustrating. Yeah, I'm like, why would you have Native print not made by like Native people at like Urban Outfitters on like underwear, and instead of like trying to like learn from and respect Native community, like all of a sudden it's like a symbol or it's a trend, but it's not something that like people are really talking about or like wanting to help Native people or even just like understand better where Native people are coming from, listen to us, or um really have these important conversations that hopefully aren't just eye-opening, but I think um it's less important that we really understand every minutia of detail, and more important that we want to help each other.
Yeah, the coming together thing's important, right?
It's important. Yeah.
I mean, we are all, it's cliche to say, but we're all just people trying to get by at the end of the day. That's what life is.
Yep.
Is you're just trying to have a better tomorrow. And that's what anybody wants
On a better future for the
for the
kids.
kids.
And I think it's frustrating. It is frustrating to have so many stereotypes that you're constantly battling against and working really hard against. But I think it's more frustrating, really, that people aren't aware of the same history as you are, and that like people feel like your history should suddenly be about them and their feelings, or people will want to maybe connect on it in ways that feel dis like not genuine. Like I think that when we have these conversations, folks will really want to talk about their own family's past and how they had a hard time, and I think it's important to understand each other. And I think also it's often not like the time or place. um, I think that like folks are so used to not having to carry a part of this burden of like collective knowledge and truth, that they're like, okay, well, I'll listen to that if you hear my story of my family's journey here and how they struggled too. And I think it's all valid and maybe not always the helpful to the conversation and like moving forward together. I don't need to know that you are or aren't privileged. I don't need to know that you or your family have struggled in XYZ ways. I just want to know that we are in this together, that my survival and your survival are intertwined. I want to know that we are human beings who are working together to make sure that nobody's kids will be in cages.
Yeah. I mean, the kids in cages. it's hard to swallow. I mean, the whole thing's hard, right? Especially the kids in cages. That I really thought Biden was going to do something with that, and it's just. But that's the gambit, right? Is you say, "Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to check these boxes. I'm going to make these changes," and then 4 years go by, and it's the next person's turn. And it's like, okay, now we're gonna make a difference. Now things are gonna get better. Life is gonna be better for all these people, and it doesn't.
And I think it's easy to see how many billions of dollars people are making off of this. It's obscene. I think that it's intentional, that nothing really changed. It's intentional. And I think that we're seeing like a lot of really shallow gestures. Like I know that Biden announced that he was going to be closing some for-profit prisons or state prisons. He was like, and made a big announcement. And then, people were like, hold on, that means that you're closing 4 jails or prison. Like, it's not the big gesture that you think it is. Like, I'm so tired of like hollow gestures from politicians that don't add up to anything. Like, really, we don't need supportive gestures. Um,
It's you're throwing somebody a bone just to appease them.
Absolutely. And you're hoping that it buys you more time so you can keep doing whatever dirt you're doing.
Yeah, they'll focus on this long enough to where you don't have to address any of the real problems.
Right. And there's such a general state of apathy that I think is just continued. Really, there's so much apathy. So many people are like so downtrodden that they're like, well, what can I do? Instead of being like, oh man, like I'm seeing, on Facebook even, like this person saying, show up to this rally. I'm going to do it. I don't know what I'm going to, do when I get there, but I'm going to show up. And even just seeing that support makes a big difference. Or, oh, I'm going to share this out with my network. I bet they're not hearing about this. Like today is a national day of remembrance for boarding school survivors, and everyone's like, you need to wear orange shirts, orange shorts. And like, absolutely, it's important to like raise awareness, and things like that do help. And I think that folks' participation can't end with wearing a different color shirt or like end with even sharing out information. It's an important step to making sure that we're all on the same page. But really, like, how does that help people at the end of the day? I mean, I think Native people are really excited to be heard and to feel like your stories are seen and important. And it would be great if there was real change that we could also affect.
What is the change that's being sought right now? Are there like prime things that it's like, okay, these are the issues that are addressing our community, and we need to fix them. Like these are plaguing us right now.
There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of dam removals that Native people are fighting for to save salmon.
That's a
Especially in the Pacific
huge thing
Northwest.
here.
It's a huge thing. It affects everybody, and Native people have been really leading in this fight to save salmon. And we're seeing, water temperatures rise, and we're seeing more and more farmed salmon that are really destroying our local salmon runs. And it's huge. I know that there have been tribal members who have said, when there are no more salmon, there's no more of us. That's what their stories have said for generations. And now it's looking like there's not going to be a lot of salmon unless we really do make concrete actions. So that's a huge one that affects everyone. The murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls is a huge thing that we are asking for, national attention for. There's a case of Gabby who went missing, and in the same area that she went missing, over 710 Indigenous women went missing in that same area and haven't been found.
Jesus.
So it's really like the stark contrast. We're not asking for less attention for Gabby. It's vital that everybody gets the same attention, that everybody's putting in the same effort to find these people. It's also a crisis that affects everybody.
That's the thing, is everybody's going missing, right? It's not one specific group. It's I mean predominantly women at scale that are just disappearing, but not really, because somebody's doing something,
Yeah.
right? And then it's just these cold cases persist.
It's crazy. I read a statistic that I'm going to completely mess up now, but it was like, the number one killer for men was like heart disease, and like the number one killer for women is like men. And it's like, well, that's horrible. And,
Yeah.
and I might be like getting the statistic wrong, but it was like really stark.
probably
It was like maybe the third down the list or something. And I was like, well, that's really horrifying. And it's real. I think that until women are treated respectfully, we're not going to get very far as a country. It's clear that there's imbalances here that have to be addressed. And I know that, transgender women especially face much higher rates of violence and murder. And I think that that's horrible. Like, there's so much more we could be doing for each other to keep each other safe. Um, like, there's this saying, like, all women know a rapist, but no men do. Like, we need men to care just as much as women do. This is a men's issue. It's not a women's issue. Um, Not to say that there aren't women who are horrible also, but really there's so many issues that I think folks think about in a way that removes them from the solution, and we have to all be the solution.
I know men care. I was gonna say I think men care. I know men care.
I hope men
Yeah, I
care.
was gonna say, let me preface that. I know men care.
Yeah.
I think it's just, I was actually talking with a friend about this the other day. If you're not a piece of shit, I think it's hard for you to grasp the reality that there are people that do that. Like, if you're not a rapist, it's hard to say, okay, like, there are people that go and will rape people. Like, that's a hard thing, and where men are getting raped, but not, I don't think it's anywhere near the rates that women are getting raped. Like, it's just not on your purview. And yet so many women that that experience that. And I don't know how you address that is the problem. I don't know what can be done. You hear this sentiment going around, especially online, and it's teach your boys to be better. And that kind of bothers me because it's not the boys that are being taught well that are going out and raping people. It's just shitty people that are perpetrating these shitty crimes, right? It's not the kid that isn't a piece of shit. It's the one that is a piece of shit. So how do you address that kid? That's
I think it's a lot more gray area than how you're thinking of it,
okay.
right? Like, I don't think the world is like broken out into like monsters,
No, it's not
and
black and white.
like, I think that really we have a culture that doesn't value consent. And I think it's, teaching folks from a little age, like, oh, like, kiss Uncle Roy, kiss Uncle, like, really telling folks how to be, and like not listening to them being like, oh no, I don't want to kiss Uncle Roy. And like, I think that it's everything, really. I think it's it's not just that it's monsters. I think that, like, we don't have a culture where consent is valued as highly as it could be, right? Like, even in like dating situations, like, hey, is this okay with you? Like, are you comfortable with this? Like, really checking into people. Like, I think that we have a culture where, like, oh, buy him another drink, so that their like consent gets like less and less matter of fact. And I think that that's really ugly. Personally, I think that it's a really ugly cultural value system that enables people to do this and not feel like a monster.
But do you think that's a majority of people doing that? Or you think it's a minority? They're just
I
prolific, I guess.
I don't know a woman well who hasn't been raped. All of the women that I know well share stories of that. So
God damn, that's
it's
that's
it's not to say that I want to be like, oh, all XYZ, or oh, all, but I do say, like, even women that I don't know well share these stories with each other often, and it's being talked about more and more. I It sounds weird, but seeing in the news, like Olympic national gymnasts really talking about this so openly, had made me feel, as a survivor, like I was so seen and more powerful and less shameful about things that I can't control. I don't know, like, a woman who's not taught to do 50 things to keep themselves safe every day, right? Like, always be on your guard, always carry your keys like this, or always, park here so that it's harder to get kidnapped. And I know that men don't get taught the same level of awareness. And I think that it's something that we should talk more about. It's not like, oh, it's just this group of people who are pieces of shit, or anything like that. I think it's more like, we as a society could do better at holding everyone accountable. Like I think as a bartender, when I was bartending, like I saw so many instances where I was like, I'm gonna take off early and walk this girl home, and or like really putting myself in the middle of harmful situations because I'm like, this isn't gonna end well. Somebody needs to look out for folks. Somebody needs to help walk people home sometimes. Like I was roofied at a bar once, and I immediately knew what it was because it wasn't the first time, and I grabbed my friend and I was like, we gotta go now. And I remember like leaving that place and like puking and like trying to get us home safely, like and quickly. And the next day, my friend was like, I don't know what happened. I just got drunker and drunker and drunker all night. And I was like, I think that's roofie. And she was like, oh, it couldn't been. They were all so nice there. And we were talking, and she'd been roofied 7 times already. So I think that it's not like even an issue of like, oh, what's the minority or major, it's an issue of like, this is so much more prevalent for everyone that I know. And it's something that isn't talked about because it's hard to talk about, and I think it's really easy for especially men to be like, oh, it's just bad guys, but I think it's so much more than that. I think it's like really an embedded part of our culture that we have to address together and talk about more, and really like remove shame around it, because why should you be ashamed of something that you had no control over? That doesn't make any sense. Why should that change your value as a human being? You had no control over it. That's something completely outside of who you are. So it's, like this traumatizing experience that, a lot of folks are living through and surviving. And then I think like focus is like, oh, I don't want to like, we don't want to ruin his life. We're not going to press charges on him. And, it's a conversation that really easily is, again, whose life are we valuing here? Whose life are we putting more weight on? Whose life are we really paying attention to? And at whose expense?
Yeah, the accountability scale is not, it's not in the right place for sure. Hearing you talk about that, I mean, what else do you say other than it's fucked up? Like, but how do you address that? I mean, not it's fucked up and like that's the end of the conversation. Like, it's fucked up. How do we change? Because as someone who would not roofie anybody or like even think about that,
Yeah.
like I'm sitting here and I don't understand what would possess somebody to do that, and then how how you stop that, because to me that's a shitty person, obviously. And it's like, okay, how do we prevent people from getting there or stopping them when they're at that point?
I
Like,
think
what are the
it's
steps that you would take?
I think it's like everybody looking out for each other more. Like if you see someone who's really drunk or acting funny, and like this guy's like, "Oh, this is my sister or this is my girlfriend, I'm gonna take her home," stopping and be like, "Can you show me a picture of you two together?" Like it can be so easy to do, and I think people are so hesitant to put themselves in like awkward positions that like we choose our own comfort over other people's safety. And so I think it's not that hard to be like, oh, this is your girlfriend's sister, can I see a picture of you guys, just to be, she doesn't look all right, I want to make sure that she's safe. And I think that if that is truly their girlfriend or sister, they'll be happy to show you a picture of them together. I think that there's so many ways where you can be like, hey, like this girl who's completely fine 5 minutes ago all of a sudden isn't. Like, can we get her a cab home? Can we, is someone here who's like female who can drive her home? I think that it's really like we spend so much time looking out for each other, but I think Americans especially are really hesitant to put themselves in the middle of like conflict. And I think that's how so many people don't end up being safe. And it's not that hard to really like look after each other. Or if you see this guy like consistently bothering women around you, saying like, hey, you're clearly bothering them, please leave them alone. They've already said no 3 times. Like, what more do they really have to do? Like, it's truly a matter of standing up for each other to keep each other safe. And it's, easy to talk about in bar culture. And I think it's a little bit harder to talk about in like everyday life. I think that there's like so many instances of like date rape and different things like that where it's really not like, oh, it's monsters out here doing it. It's really like this is happening so often to women. It can't just be a few bad people. It can't be. And I think like when guys are talking about it, with each other when there's no women around. There's more accountability, and creating a culture where that's not okay. Creating a culture where it's talked about more than by women, and like hushed voices talking about things that have happened to them. It has to be more of a culture of like, hey, what are we gonna do? How are we keeping each other safe? Like, hey, I saw that, it's not cool. Like making sure that it's on small scales, making big impacts.
Part of me thinks it's like a circle thing because I think the guys that are doing that aren't hanging around the guys that would not allow that necessarily, right? So if a guy's roofing girls or getting girls plastered, he's not hanging around people that would say, "Hey, what are we doing here? This is not this is not okay." So I think it takes that accountability out of it, right? Because if you're with a crowd that is egging you on or supporting what you're doing, where's the accountability in that?
Maybe, but
I mean,
um
I'm just trying to think in my own.
yeah.
So obviously, happy to say that I don't associate with people that would do that. So I'm trying to figure out how you would. I mean, obviously, intervention's a big thing, right? That's a hard part for people to grasp, especially if it's a couple arguing or you think it's a couple arguing. You don't want to go up and say, "Hey, is everything okay?" Because you don't want to. There's this weird stigma about inserting yourself in somebody else's relationship, and I think you're right. I think doing that is important.
It is a weird stigma. I think people are like quicker to like call the cops than like to be like, "Hey, something doesn't sound right." And I think also like um if you're the person saying like, "Hey, are you guys okay?" then sometimes they'll be like, "Yes," and like
You're
get
like, "Oh, my
upset with
bad."
you,
Yeah.
but also it's important I think for people in unhealthy situations to realize that it doesn't look healthy from the outside, right? I think that validation of like, "Hey, this is something obviously not normal or healthy," is important for folks to hear, because it's not. And I think that like especially folks in like abusive situations have been taught that that's okay. They're being conditioned to say like, "Oh, this is normal. This is that's part of grooming. Really, is like changing someone's reality, into which one where they can be abused more. Like you're slowly shifting what their boundaries are and what they'll put up with.
And so you said you've been roofied multiple times.
Twice, yeah.
Does that scare the fuck out of you? Does that make you not want to go out? I mean, I wouldn't want to go out to a bar. I wouldn't trust anybody.
I mean, I was a bartender for 6 years, so I think that gave me a sense of safety, because I was the one pouring drinks. I was the one in control. I was able to like help women get home. I felt a lot of confidence around that. And yeah, I would really only go to bars where I knew the bartenders, where I knew that they'd look after me, where if I, if someone was bothering me, they would make
They'd have
them
your
leave.
back.
Yeah. And like, I can't tell you the number of times that like someone walked me home because there was a random person following me, or someone, made sure I got on the subway, or made someone like leave who was very clearly, drunk and, obnoxious or, so I think in a lot of ways, like, yeah, I get scared sometimes to buy groceries at night. And it's not like a great reality, and I can't let fear stop me from living a life. So I think it's a matter of like being safe, and it's a matter of like needing to also live. And it's I don't really go out to bars anymore. But I also think that it's a whole culture that I don't want to buy into.
Well, you shouldn't have to be afraid to go out to a bar, right?
Well, no one should, and you do. Like I think, like when women especially have bad experiences, people are so quick to be like, "What were you wearing? Oh, did you lead XYZ?" Like people are just so horrible that it's like your own fault if you get hurt, instead of saying like, "Oh no, it's this guy," who really took advantage of someone. And I think like the blame is incorrectly placed a lot of times. And I think it's a part of like shifting culture to be like, that's never okay. Like that's never okay. It's always, the person who's doing it's fault. So I think it's a matter of talking about it more and being more open about it, and like making sure that we're taking care of each other as human beings.
A lot of people don't like to have the conversation, though.
It's a hard
It's the problem.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think And I think that our culture teaches us to be ashamed, or it teaches us to like bottle it up, or it says nobody you know is doing this. And like, if you have 100 guy friends, probably someone is. Like, I think I think, and to a certain extent, you're probably right that different circles of people, stay together. And I think that maybe there's a piece of that that's really like naive to think that like none of your friends could possibly do this. Like, there's no way that all of the women that I'm close with in my life have experienced that, and none of the guys, have not done that, right? And I'm not saying that as a like criticism of your guy friends. I'm saying that as like that doesn't make sense.
Well, I think you try to culminate good people around you, obviously. And the problem is you never really know what somebody's capable of until they're in a situation like that. You like to think you know people, but you don't.
Yeah, you don't know what people are really like in their home life. Really, you never really know what happens in people's home life. You know the side of them that they choose to show you. Um, and people, change too. We have experiences that mold us and shape us. And so, even though you thought you might know someone really well, I think it's really vital to like believe women if they do tell you X, Y,
Oh, I've
Z,
definitely
like.
I think you should definitely believe the victim 100%. I think the believe all women thing can get dicey, not to take away from survivors or anything like that, but so, this is touchy. We're going to get into some even more an even more touchy subject, but some people do lie, unfortunately. Not taking away from the believe all women. You should believe the victim. You should believe the person that comes forward and says, "Hey, this happened to me," and you should find all the evidence and see everything through. And if somebody does something, they there should be repercussions for that. You shouldn't just get off scot-free for roofing somebody or sexually assaulting someone. Like, there have to be consequences, otherwise the actions just go unpunished and then nothing ever changes. But things it's just such a weird time. And there are from a guy, I can only speak from a guy's perspective, right? I've heard stories from guys, and who knows, maybe they fed me a line of shit and I bought it because I want to believe people are good people. But I've heard stories of guys who have gone out with a woman or something happened and then, you know, things happen and they say, oh, not necessarily, oh, yeah, I was raped, but oh, I was sexually assaulted or something when the sex was consensual or things like that. And it's just a dicey subject because you want, when someone comes forward and says, hey, this happened to me, you should believe them. Because why lie about that? But some people do lie. And I think that's where it gets dicey for people, is because then they fall into this camp of, oh, we have to believe everyone, or oh, we shouldn't believe anyone. And then it just creates this divide between people. I feel like I did not do that justice at all. I'm over here, because I'm getting uncomfortable right now talking about it because people don't talk about it. So then when you try to talk about it, you're like getting all flustered to try to make a point, but you don't want to step on somebody's toes, but then you don't have the real conversation behind it.
I will say that
Please do. Please say, because
be-
you've got a thought going. I can see it, and
because this is something that I'm not like shy about. It's something that I've
that's
talked
great.
about a lot, and I've only heard that expressed from other guys, for the record. And I
That's
think
not an opinion from. It's just from guys
I've
that say that.
only heard guys say that. And I think that um, that's a really interesting perspective, um, from people who don't experience this kind of trauma at the same rates, or as often. So something that's like been a part of, you know, what shaped me to be the person that I am. It's really interesting to hear like another person who's never, experienced it and being like, well, sometimes people lie though. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, but how does this conversation turn from like, oh man, like every woman that I know has had a story about this, to being like, some women are lying though, right? Like,
No, yeah.
because that's it's a bit disheartening. And
And
I
it
think
probably gets, I mean, me saying it, obviously that's the first time I've said that to you, but if this isn't the first time you've heard it and you have to keep explaining, I could see that getting almost jading you in a way because it's like, okay, I've heard this from 30 other guys. Whereas for me, it's a fresh conversation.
Yeah, I feel like hearing that, um, I feel like that's the reason why a lot of women don't tell guys.
It's because they say that.
Yeah, is because the conversation turns into one that focuses on like men's victimization instead of like real traumas that are happening daily to women. And I think that's a really interesting shift from what the problem is to like a side conversation that doesn't add value to like solution creation and instead absolves men from doing the work of like talking to each other and creating solutions. In order for our society to have safer women, we need accountable men and men who want to be proactive. And I think a guy's worst case scenario of like being accused of that is nothing like a woman's worst case scenario of that happening to her. And for some reason, the value of the it turns into like, oh, well, we need to be thinking about men here. We need to be thinking about like their worst case scenario, and we need to focus on that instead of like, oh man, like this is happening on a crazy scale to women. What are we doing to be a part of that solution? And I think that that's a bummer.
That's a good point because I'm, I'm sad to say this, but I know a ton of women who have experienced some form of sexual assault, and obviously, I believe all of them. And in saying that, somebody's doing that. Somebody is doing that. So like, so I don't want to take away from that because it's a real thing and it's a real problem. But as a guy, I think maybe that's it. Because as a guy, I'm thinking in terms of like what is affecting me almost. Not in like a bad way, but I'm a guy. So my first instinct is, okay, how do I fit into this piece? And since I'm not someone that's gonna rape somebody or sexually assault someone, I'm on the receiving end of, oh, what if someone accused me? And I think a good example of that is what happened with Biden, right? Where he was accused. Maybe this isn't a good example, but I'm going to roll with it for a second. He was accused, and this pissed me off, so maybe I'm just bringing this up because I'm still heated about it. But he was accused of sexual assault, right? And I think that's a big deal. I think that should have been looked into, and if it did happen, something needs to be done about that. And Kamala Harris agreed with it. She was like, if believe all women, this happened. And then as soon as she gets put on the VP ticket, oh no, I believe Joe, and it didn't happen. And we were just debating. That's why I threw that out there. But when you joke about things like that, it diminishes the subject matter. So then it's okay. Did it happen? Did it not happen? It doesn't really matter because it's in the past. But as a guy, if someone accuses you of sexual assault, your life's over. Your life is over. And rightfully so, because if you did do it, your life should be more than over. You should be facing consequences. But if you didn't do it, that's I mean, I'm struggling now because I get what you're saying. And in saying what I'm saying, I'm kind of struggling with my ideas because I don't want to take away from your experience or other people's experiences that have been through it. And I haven't. Nobody's ever roofied me. I've never been sexually assaulted. Like I haven't had a firsthand experience. So I'm only speaking as a bystander in a way. But that's a real thing, like that fear. And I've talked to other guys about it, and that's guys that don't perpetrate it have the fear of being accused, which maybe they shouldn't because if you're not doing it, why be afraid of it? I don't know, it's a hard it's a hard conversation to have. And people get uncomfortable because nobody's having the conversation. So when you finally bring it up, everybody cowers or they don't say how they really feel and nothing ever changes because you're not actually talking about the problem. I mean, right? It's a shitty thing. I'm over here I'm trying to work through my ideas now. Because if you get accused and you didn't do it, it fucking sucks. Like that's shitty and that shouldn't happen. But if you get accused and you did do it, even if you don't get accused and you did it, that fucking sucks and something should be done about that.
Statistics are like 99% of reported cases, like cases of rape, don't get to even like trial. There's no
Is that the
conviction.
shame? That
It's,
stigma of shame that's keeping people from coming forward.
I mean, I think it's part of that. I think like our justice system doesn't do a lot of justice to victims, in my experience. Um, I think, like it's stacked against you entirely. There's this woman who was studying perpetrators, and she said that there was a case of this guy who was accused of it, widely known, and like, the college that it happened at like helped him really cover it up. They gave her the wrong, reports to file against him. He used it as like something to bring up on first dates, where he's like building trust with women by saying like, oh, this, I was accused of this but it didn't happen, like it. So, you know I think that, I wonder if a conversation about like women's, you know, real struggles always being a conversation of like, could it happen if a woman is lying? Like if there's any, like the shade that's really thrown on women and to discredit them is one that consistently happens and makes it so that women don't come forward. In my experience, like one of the times that it happened to me, all of the like girls in my high school knew that this person was doing that and never said anything. And I think that that's partially like high schoolers, who were taught shame, were dealing with trauma, were like really struggling on their own. But also that enabled this guy to continue doing it to other people. So, um, so I think that really, like the fear of not being believed, is there because women aren't believed. And I think that a conversation about rape that is always centered around like men's worst fears isn't entirely productive when talking about it.
Now that I've calmed down, I've thought of a prime example. Now that I've caught my composure a little bit, Brock Turner, right?
Oh yeah,
Piece of shit,
yeah.
and he got, what was it, 2 years?
I don't even think that
And there was evidence. It checked all the boxes. It was proven that he did what he did.
it was on tape.
It was on
Yeah,
tape, and he gets 2 years. If he got 2 years, it was something short, like 2 years.
I think he got out early for good behavior too.
And that's got to be a slap in the face to everyone that's ever gone through it, because you see something that checked all the boxes. There was proof. There was no way to dispute it, and then the verdict comes down, and this is what it is. It's not. It's a slap on the wrist for something that can't be taken back, for something that inevitably changed that girl's life forever. And so you get that, and as a compassionate human being, you sit there and you think, what are we doing? How is that justice? How does that solve anything? How does that address the problem? And so it would just be frustrating. And so I feel like that deters people. I could see that deterring people from coming forward, because here was this case where everything was everything was lined up in the most beneficial way that it could have been for her to get justice, and there was no justice.
I mean, justice is a hard thing to get, and um, I wonder, you know, what she would say about that. I wonder if um, what is truly just is, these situations not happening. And if,
That would be
you
ideal.
know, yeah, I wonder, what, you know, what we could do to maybe like not look at the most publicized things, but as a society to look out for each other.
Yeah, that's just one that caught the media's attention, right? How
Yeah.
many how many other women are out there? I mean, I know a ton that it just this is something that happened, and that's all that it is.
Yeah.
That's that's a problem. That's a problem. And there was this other college student, and I think this is where the fear comes from as a guy who's not to toot my own horn, but who's not a piece of shit like in that way at least. There was a guy, I want to say Arizona State, who went out to this bar and met up with this girl, and they were flirting, they were, talking, decided to go back to her place, and something happened, and I think she said that he sexually assaulted her, and it came out on, there was footage, there were text messages that he didn't. And his life, I think the school kicked him out and he lost his scholarship. And he was like, I didn't do anything. Like, she was the aggressor. All this stuff happened, but then I'm trying to remember the case because I'm not doing it justice. But that is a case where somebody said something that wasn't true. And here I go again. I'm backtracking on, but that does, unfortunately, even if it's 1%, that does happen. And so, how do you, maybe I'm asking more for advice. How do you balance that? How do you address the need to believe all victims, which you should? Anyone that comes forward and says, hey, this happened to me, you should give them the benefit of the doubt and do due diligence and look at the case. And if something happened, address it and actually have justice come forward. But if somebody says this happened and it didn't happen, what do you do in that situation? How do you handle that? Because that's sticky. It's a sticky situation.
I don't know. I don't know how you would handle that.
And it's
I
hard.
don't pretend to be, like
No,
someone that
I know.
has all of the answers.
I'm more mulling over it.
And I also think like, what you're talking about, you're like, "Oh yeah, we're going to do due diligence and figure out, what happened." Like that's the role of like cops, hopefully, to be doing that. Not like individuals.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying is police, because a lot of times they don't, right? They say, oh, that what were you wearing thing that is so
Yeah.
fucking stupid.
Well, even like, lots of rape kits aren't tested every year. So I think really it's a breakdown of the criminal justice system. And that is the place where they're supposed to, figure out if someone, um, you know, if the case has validity or not.
And it falls short a lot of the times.
Yeah. Statistically, it does fall short.
That seems like a good place to start, but how do you change that? How do you get I don't is it just you're almost trying to break down a culture of something that is not ingrained, but that has been prevalent, and now you're trying to pump the brakes on it and say, okay, this isn't okay. It wasn't okay back then, even though it was swept under the rug and just not looked at. We need to do something about it because it's sickening and it's one of those problems that is so big. It's easy to say, well, we can't change anything, so what do we do? You just hope that it doesn't happen to anybody you know, but that doesn't solve anything because it's out there happening.
Yeah, I think it's a big issue, and I think it's one that we can, actively work on together. I think it really is like looking out for each other. I think it really is, looking out for strangers. It's, you're not always going to be in a situation where you know everybody, but making sure that women are safe should be a priority.
And checking in if you see something going on, like you said.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
Just saying, hey, is everything okay here? Are we all good? I've done that a couple times where you just check in and say, hey, you know, are you okay? You look a little drunk. Is everything going good? And that's important, but you're not always there, unfortunately. Do you think it's that has to do with how people are raised that breeds that culture, or it's just because society it's still just not addressed isn't the right word, but it's not it's not given the gravity that it deserves.
I think it's
Because I mean, if this is happening to 5% of women nationwide, that's a big portion, and it's got to be statistically way more than that. But I don't hear Biden talking about that or any Congress people talking about that, saying, okay, we need to do something to address this problem because it's a big problem.
there's a lot of studies that, come out that show how many women this affects, from school age kids to adults. There doesn't seem to be like a lot of task forces addressing it, and I think that it's something that really like we see in the media being like made light of, or maybe that's sometimes the only place that talks about it. I think um like I don't want to say it's like how people were raised, but because I, that's not necessarily my place, but I think it's obvious that we have a culture that does not value consent. And I think having more value on consent culture from, kids to adults is a part of the solution, and focusing on like, learning and respecting each other's boundaries is a big part of the solution.
Yeah, I mean, you have to start somewhere. You have to start somewhere, because otherwise, I mean, I don't want my kids to have to talk, have these talks. And you do hear there are different talks that men and women get, right, when they go out. Like my mom told me, watch your drink, but it was never the same pressure that I interpreted from hearing other people talk about it. Like I never had to worry about holding my keys in between my knuckles or parking under a street lamp so that my car is lit up or getting in and locking my car right away so that nothing happens. There's just different like I never had to work. There were some areas in college where you wouldn't walk down by yourself because it's a rough area, but it was, you might get jumped or like you might get robbed or something. There was never any fear of someone taking you, or whether that was warranted or not. That just wasn't on your radar as a guy. I mean, I would walk all over, by myself at night on campus, anything. And it was never a thought in the back of your head of, okay, I should be on guard. And maybe that's because I was younger and I was more oblivious and didn't have a care in the world. But I had friends who would say, oh no, I don't go anywhere by myself.
Yeah. I think, in my experience, I never had someone like jump out at me and like that's how I was ever like harmed. Like really it was normal people,
And most of the time,
nice people,
statistically,
nice
it's
guys,
someone right?
charismatic people, um, you know, who were well liked or popular, or like people who really seemed like they had a lot going for them. It wasn't like, some monster in a cape like jumping out or anything. And I think that's the hard part of like realizing as a woman, like, that you aren't always safe. It's because it's a realization that like it's it's not monsters, or it's not like the bad guys on TV, and like they're, obviously bad guys, who only dress in dark trench coats and
Like people
it's,
like to brand it as.
yeah, it's normal people who have friends who have, come from good families, who it could be really, you know anyone. And I think that's hard. I think it makes it hard to trust people, and I think it's a fear that a lot of women have. They're hesitant to trust, and I think that's a learned behavior.
And it's justifiable. That's the problem. Is it's not like it's unwarranted fear or caution. It's like, no, it's a healthy caution.
It is, and it's, like if your bartender is making a drink and they're not making it up on the table, if they make it over here, then all of a sudden you can't drink it, or if it's you can't leave your drink unattended, and it's, sometimes like you can't go to the bathroom by yourself. Like people make fun of women for going to the bathroom by themselves. They're staying safe, and it's sad that has to be a safety mechanism. But like everything that you do is for safety, and it's a sad reality. Earrings fell out.
Yeah, and it's perpetrated even more so to Native American women.
Statistically, yes.
Is that talked about even more so in those communities? Like on top of the caution of just being a woman and just being vigilant, are there extra precautions of, okay, yes, you're a woman, and but you also are more targeted now.
I think it's talked about a lot more. Um, it's not a cultural taboo to talk about. It's something that we have rallies about, that we, see a lot of community involvement around. And I think um, and I think that there's a lot of work to prevent that from happening. So I think that in some ways,
Work to prevent you guys from rallying?
work to prevent us from going murdered or missing, or
Okay.
work to prevent us from being harmed. I think that there's um I think that there's a lot being done. Not to say that like we have all of the solutions necessarily, but I think that like our community cares a lot and shows up for each other a lot.
That's 90% of it. Is having a support system and having a group of people watching out and saying, we're being. I think, I don't know the story, but something just happened at EHS and they staged a walkout for sexual assault. And I think our Fortuna maybe joined in. A few schools joined in here locally, and I thought that was kind of cool to see. I mean, we never had that when I went there, I think.
Yeah. I think that younger generations are have a much healthier outlook on it and are, you know, hopefully able to really help change these tides of what we're doing to keep each other safe.
I hope so. I mean, I would like to see some change in our generation. That would be nice on all of these fronts, because it gets a little. I'm only 23, but I'm already sick of people making these promises and nothing changing. It gets a little frustrating watching that play out. I mean, especially with all this, even with all this COVID stuff. Just the back. Nobody wants to admit fault. Nobody wants to say we're just trying to figure things out. Nobody's being honest. It's all this smoke and mirrors and people making these moves behind the scenes and then expecting people to just go along with everything.
What do you mean?
I think, well, I don't know if you've been following along with the whole Fauci emails thing and the gain of function research. No,
Dr.
kind of.
Fauci?
Yeah.
I don't know what emails you're referring
So
to.
he has been adamant when speaking before, I think it was before Congress, about how the NIH and everything has not been involved in any gain of function research, and especially regarding the lab leak hypothesis, which has been floated around, that they were not involved, that he has not funded any gain of function research. And then it's come out in his emails that they have funded gain of function research. And through the NIH, they have actually provided funding to the Wuhan laboratory in China. So everything he said that didn't happen kind of happened, and people were like, okay, what is this? But nobody wants to talk about it. And I'm not doing that story justice either. But the only reason people know about it is because his emails were leaked and they were talking about it. You didn't hear about this.
I didn't hear anything about it.
Nothing about the emails or
It
anything.
sounds a little bit like a
Oh,
conspiracy theory.
it does. That's the problem, right? Is because you bring it up and you're like, oh, this is a little dicey, but it's a real. His emails are out there. It's a real thing, but nobody's talking about it. It sounds conspiratorial, right? If I feel like we should be in a back room somewhere and I'll be like, let me tell you some shit about Fauci's emails. But it's a thing. Check it out. It's a thing. I mean, maybe I'm off basis because I've only watched a couple clips and it was a while when this first started coming out. Um, but yeah, a
So,
lot of the
so like what
things.
you're implying is that like Dr. Fauci had a part to do with this virus being created?
No. I don't think he helped it be created. But the gain of function research, which is the research that is along the same lines of what they think COVID was started off of, if you follow the lab leak thing, it's. I'm not going to do this justice. It's messing with these viruses in a way to see how they react so that if one were to present itself, that we would be prepared. So it's research against viruses by manipulating these viruses. And he has been adamant that the NIH has not funded or done any research along those lines because Obama, when he was president, outlawed that line of research. And what has been coming forward now is that while Trump was in office, because it was so hectic and it was such a shit show, that this gain of function research was actually started back up under Fauci, and funding was provided to these other research labs and all this stuff. And so when he went before Congress and tested, no, there was no gain of function research. We have not provided funding. We have not been a part of it. In his emails, he was addressing, oh, like, that's the research we've been doing, was gain of function research. And oh, we did provide funding to the Wuhan laboratory. And it's funny, in the emails, this is going to sound even more conspiratorial. In the emails, they actually were talking about how, you know, this is going to sound so conspiratorial. The virus doesn't line up with a virus that you would see from the wild. It looked like it'd been manipulated. But he goes in front of the public and says, no, there's no way this came from the lab. There's no evidence of that. This is a virus from the bats. It's not man-made. It hasn't been touched. But behind the scenes, him and his colleagues were saying, okay, this looks a little fishy. Maybe this came from somewhere. Not acknowledging that it came from the lab or saying that it didn't in the emails, but to the public, there's just a lot of smoke and mirrors. And that's why saying this, I feel like we should be on some conspiracy thing, which is why it's a good thing it's a podcast, because we could be. But there's all this backroom stuff. I'm surprised you haven't heard about the emails, at least. I thought that was out there, but maybe not. Maybe I'm in a different crowd.
I feel like
Maybe I
you're
need
looking
to check.
for this.
Yeah,
Are
maybe
you
I need to
looking for
check my
this?
sources. But that's a thing. If that's all true,
I mean, if that was
Do
true,
you
that would
think
be
the-
tons of,
you would
studies
think
and
you would think people would be talking about it. Do you believe in the lab leak thing? Do you think it came from a lab?
this is the first I'm hearing
Of
about
even
it.
the lab thing?
Yeah.
Whoa, whoa! Either I'm in some deep conspiracies, or you're a little sheltered.
I mean, I regularly read what the CDC is putting out.
This is the first time you've heard that there's a theory that it came from the Wuhan lab. That it was.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my god. This is my biggest problem with the news today. If we can't even agree on facts, whether this is a fact or not a fact, take anything. If we can't agree on basic, if like QAnon, that QAnon's not. Do you know about QAnon?
I do.
Do you believe in QAnon?
Do I believe in it?
Yeah. Do you think that's a real thing?
That they're like a group of people?
No. There's definitely a group of people.
There's
but
definitely a group of
yeah,
people.
that there's some guy Q releasing these things, and there's, you know, kids being kept under pizza places.
I
You
don't think
know
I've heard
that?
about that.
Okay, well, QAnon. Do you think there's a guy that's releasing that information and that the QAnon conspiracy is real?
I mean, I know that there's a QAnon group of people.
Yes.
That's like the extent of my and I was under the impression that they weren't like completely normal human beings.
Okay,
And that was
okay.
like the extent of my knowledge.
Yes. Well, they believe in some things that I would say are a little out there, but that is there to them. That's factual information, the stuff they're going off of. And to me, maybe that's not factual information. And so my problem with the news and everything today, we all have different facts. And if we can't agree on what a fact and what isn't a fact, how do we come to the table and have an actual conversation? Because if you think the sky's blue, and I say, oh no, the sky's red, how are we gonna have an actual conversation? Where do we go from there?
I mean, the news is kind of like skewed presented to you because it's based off of what your search history is. So the more that you're looking for something, the more you're going to see something.
Well, yes, online, but even
Yeah.
CNN or Fox News. If you watch CNN for 30 minutes, you're going to have a completely different worldview than if you watch Fox News for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So if you're only consuming news from one medium, how do you come to the table and have an actual conversation with anyone? Because you've got this whole set of facts, and you're thinking this way, and I come over here and I've got all this, and we try to come together, and it's like, you're crazy, you're a conspiracy theorist. And then you're looking at me the same way, and it's like, where do we go? What is gonna happen? I'm basically at the stage in my life where I think the whole world's gonna fall apart, but I'm interested to see what happens. I think that's my MO.
It might fall apart.
It feels like it.
I mean, I do follow the news pretty regularly, and I haven't heard
Nothing-
those things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Check into the emails, because I know I can at least say for certain that Fauci's emails have been leaked.
Let me ask you, what does that change?
Well, if there was gain of function research and Fauci knew about it and has provided funding and has been conducting it and lied to Congress and lied to the American people, I think that's important. I think that's a problem.
If that all is true, absolutely important. But what does it change for you? Like in this pandemic? Like what would that change for you in your reality and day-to-day life?
My It would confirm the fact that I believe this pandemic is politicized and that people aren't necessarily completely dealing in facts. We're dealing more in public opinion and in sway of public desire. And it would confirm the fact that I believe there's not accountability at that level. If Fauci came out and lied, which he did, let's take a step back and look at the mask thing. When he first came out and said, "Oh, masks don't work. You don't need masks." And then he turned around and said, "Oh, actually, masks do work. Everybody needs a mask. You should go out and get one." You can't lie to people because then you create what we're in now, where half the population thinks masks don't work and half think masks do work, and they're at each other's throats about it. Because we're creating this divide between people because you weren't honest up front. I'm a big honesty guy.
I
That's my
mean,
biggest
I think
thing.
that there's that honesty is vital.
Yeah.
And in science, things do change based on research. And I think that doesn't mean that someone's like necessarily lying, but if you have new research that comes out, it's important to, check.
Yeah,
Like
which is
science is
what
always a practice of discovery.
absolutely, which is what I would say if he hadn't come out and said, "Oh, I said masks don't work so that people wouldn't go out and buy masks because we didn't want, our frontline workers in our healthcare system not having the PPE that they needed." Then it's like, "Okay, well, you lied. You lied. I get it was for this reason, you wanted to save masks, which is good, obviously, but you could have come out and said, "Hey, masks work. Everyone should get a mask when they can, but we also don't want to overrun the system. We need our frontline workers to have masks so that they're protected because if somebody gets sick and they get them sick, then we're going to have real problems." Why not just come out and say that? Why lie to people and then backtrack? That creates a problem.
I mean,
And then you've got people over here like me who are sitting on podcasts talking about Fauci emails, and it's like, is that a conspiracy or is this true?
I've not heard that. I think that no one in the CDC or government should ever be lying to us. And we also see statistics that like 1 in 500 Americans have died from COVID. So obviously the pandemic, whether government has misled us on something, which I mean,
Yeah,
you're
I
talking to a
would
Native
not be.
American.
Yeah, would not be out of the realm of
But I
possibility.
also think truly, like, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I don't really care. Like, I really want to make sure that we're all safe. Like,
Hmm.
I would love to see my family and everyone stay safe through this. Like, I hope everyone stays safe. I hope everyone gets vaccinated. Like, I really hope that we all make it out of here because 1 in 500 people is a tremendous number of human beings dying. And it's, we don't need to be dying. Like, studies have shown that if you get vaccinated, you're much less likely to die. I don't know why everyone isn't, focusing on that.
How do you feel about the vaccine mandate requirements?
I personally don't mind. Like, I do hope everyone gets vaccinated. I got vaccinated as soon as I could. And I think really, like, in America, we have had to get vaccinated against so many things to go to public school, to do, anything. So most Americans do go to public school. Most Americans have been vaccinated against so many different diseases. That's why we don't have smallpox or polio anymore, like, really. So I'm not sure why there's like such a contention around getting this vaccine. Like, we know it saves lives. We know you're less likely to be like, on your deathbed because of COVID. And it's a real issue that we're seeing out here. So I don't know why people aren't taking it more seriously. And I don't really get the horse pills thing.
Ivermectin.
I don't get it.
You want to put on a tinfoil hat for a second? Ivermectin. Okay, we're gonna get pulled off YouTube, but this is so gonna be worth it. Ivermectin is, an antiviral that has been used on humans before, that has been proven effective against a ton of different viruses. It's won it's won some award. I want to sound like I don't know, some prestigious award because it was so important that people found it. And there is some evidence, there definitely needs to be more research. There is some evidence that it is a good preventative tool against COVID, that it has helped people. There are doctors that have prescribed it and seen benefit, but nobody wants to talk about that because it's the horse dewormer. That's been the branding everywhere. It's a horse dewormer. There was a Rolling Stones article, I talked about this before, by the Rolling Stones, that there was a hospital somewhere that was overrun with people who had taken the horse dewormer, and they were taking beds from gunshot victims. The Rolling Stones published this. Everything seemed fine. Lo and behold, it was completely not true. A hospital from that area came forward and said, this is not happening. We have not had any patients come in with any illness from ivermectin. We have not turned down any gunshot victims. We have not given beds to any gunshot victims. The person that spoke to the Rolling Stones and gave the interview hasn't worked at a hospital in like 5 years. They were a doctor or a nurse or something. Completely false. And all the Rolling Stones did was put up a disclaimer at the top, oh, this hasn't been fact checked. And that's where I go back to, that's where I feel conspiratorial, because it's like I go back to, if we can't agree on facts and actually check information, you're going to have people out here sitting around believing wild things. And ivermectin, if that works, if it is true that it does help against COVID and we're not using it, that's crazy. And if there are articles coming out saying, oh, it is useful, but it's not, that is also crazy. We can't agree on facts. But from the little research that I've done, doctors are prescribing it and seeing success. I think it's Japan. I want to say Japan is actually allowing doctors to prescribe it because they're seeing great success with it. I think Mexico used it as a preventative and saw great success as like countrywide. And yet here it's just branded as a horse dewormer. And if you talk about using it, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, or oh, you're a crackhead who's buying horse dewormer from the local horse market or the horse store or whatever it is. You get that branding, and then it shuts down the conversation. Because if you get labeled crazy, we're done talking. I don't have to talk to you anymore because you're crazy. So everything you say is going to be crazy. Feels a little crazy, huh? I feel like you're looking at me like, dude, where are you getting your information?
I would love
You're
to...
making me feel crazy,
Well,
I'll be honest. I was like resolute, and now I'm
no,
like, God.
I would love to see like your references.
Yeah.
Because I've not heard that about the horse pill. I've heard that it's a horse dewormer and that you should not be taking it as a human being, not a horse. Give it to your horses for the worms, but like you as a human being, don't take it for COVID. Like get the vaccination and, wash your hands and stuff.
But this is what I'm talking about. You have this complete set of facts.
Like from the CDC.
Yeah. And I have this other complete set of facts from like...
Where?
Well, I think the World Health Organization has definitely talked about how it has been used previously. Before COVID, there's a ton of information online. I think the World Health Organization, it's on some top list of like the 50 or 100 most influential discoveries. It's a real thing. It's been used all across Africa. People have used it for a long time, not in reference to COVID, which is where we're coming into this problem, but it has been in use. But because it's also a horse dewormer and has been used for that, that's the branding that people are running with right now to discourage people. And I'm not condoning anybody go out and buy this and start taking it, of course. But people have been using it. Doctors have been prescribing it. Countries have been using it. But that's not being talked about. It's just, oh, it's a horse dewormer. I mean, you didn't even know. And I could be completely wrong. Maybe I am. But that just reinforces my point of facts. Like, I'm sitting here saying, oh, I think this is a fact. And you're over here like, dude, you're smoking some crack. Where are you getting this stuff from? Because you've got this other set of facts. And we're just going, this is the world we live in now. Where I could sit over here and think, oh, this is all completely true, and be taking this as my gospel and using this information and maybe taking ivermectin. And you could be over there like, you're going to die. But that's what it is. That's the world today. And I feel crazy sitting over here now talking about it, but that's, from my purview, like this is all real. And I don't, you're like, yeah, but this is what I'm talking about, right?
I mean,
Because if I just came up to you on the street and started spewing this, you'd be like,
If I didn't know
Get me the
you from when
fuck.
you were young, I would
Yeah.
have probably been like, I don't
You'd
think
be
this
like,
is a
I need to
conversation.
get out
Yeah,
of here.
appointments.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely would not recommend taking the horse dewormer. I will absolutely look into it more, but pretty sure the CDC has not recommended that. They're recommending, the vaccinations.
Yes, the CDC is definitely not talking about
Yeah,
ivermectin.
and I do definitely trust their
Yeah.
guidance, and I'm not a disease expert, so I will listen to those who are.
Yeah. Well, definitely, I would definitely say just take a peek. Just take a peek at it, really, because it might make you think Nick is crazy. Might also make you think, oh, okay, that's odd. Because if it is true, that's odd. Why is nobody talking about that? If these other countries are using it and finding success, if doctors are using it as a preventative, that's what I'm most familiar with. Not if you get COVID and you start taking it, though I've heard stories of that. But it's definitely been in use and prescribed by people that would have the knowledge on whether or not to prescribe it. And it's just weird. From my perspective, it's just weird that the only thing you hear about is these crackheads taking horse dewormer.
I mean, I haven't heard of any crackheads taking it,
Okay.
but
I've heard of a few crazy people.
I have heard it's not recommended for human use.
Yeah.
So I would definitely talk to my doctor before, anything.
Yes,
like
do
that.
not go out to the farm store and buy it. Don't do that. But crazy times.
I mean, it does sound kind of like you're like, go to the farm
does.
store and buy it. It sounds
Oh,
like
no,
you're
I'm not. No,
like
no,
a
no,
little
I'm not.
bit. You're talking about how much.
But I'm definitely
success
telling
it has.
people that I would not go to the farm store and buy it. But if you're sitting at your computer and you want to do some DuckDuckGo searches or possibly some Google searches, I think you can find it on there too. It's just, I'm all about people being honest. And so when you find things, articles that are saying, oh, this is one way, and there's a lot of misinformation online, so who knows? But if this is something that other countries are doing, I just think it's weird that the news and the media are pushing this anti ivermectin stance. Because they're not even saying ivermectin, it's all horse dewormer. And if it works, if it helps people and doesn't hurt people, why would we not want to use that?
I mean, I think we would wait for, the scientists that we employ to say this is what works. The FDA has not approved it. So I think that's important.
Well, you know what's weird about that? God, we're just going to keep going deep. The booster shots, 2 high profile FDA people stepped down because they weren't comfortable with people taking the booster shots. And that kind of just got swept under the rug.
Well, when you read what they were saying that they don't think that it's necessary to get the booster shot because the 2 vaccinations have done what they wanted it to do. It's effectively preventing people from dying or getting seriously sick.
Yes.
So I think that that's reasonable. But I think that their recommendation that people over 65 or with underlying health conditions take it makes sense. But I think in general, like, we have so much of the world's vaccinations, and there are people here who still haven't gotten vaccinated, so giving them the opportunity to makes sense.
This is not going to help my case. I'm not vaccinated. Not out of any conspiracy, because I'm vaxxed up on everything. I've got meningitis, meningococcal. I've got so many different vaccines running through my body. But I just honestly haven't gotten it. Not for any reason I could say, oh, this is why I'm not getting it. I just haven't gotten it.
You haven't gotten it for no reason.
I haven't gotten it because, if I'm, probably just because I don't think I would die from it. And the stats that, if you get COVID, it's 6 to 13 times more effective than the vaccine, the antibodies are, I just don't think, I don't know, I don't have a legitimate reason why I haven't gotten it. It's just I haven't gone down there and gotten it.
I mean, I think I hear this from young people like a lot, saying, they
Oh,
don't
it's
think
not gonna
that
hurt me.
they don't think that they're gonna die, so they don't get it. But like my partner, his cousin lives with us now because he at 33 caught COVID, and really COVID itself is mostly dangerous because if you have underlying conditions, it really affects them. And
Yes.
it turned out that he unknowingly had no idea he had a tumor in his brain pushing up against his pituitary gland for over a decade.
Oh wow.
Never knew it. And so when he caught COVID, the tumor started acting up, and he was getting like a headache, and then he went like blind. His vision was just gone. So he went to the ER, and they had to airlift him to Seattle and perform 2 surgeries to get this tumor out of his brain while he had COVID. And it's a miracle that he's alive, and he's going to be blind forever. And
Wow.
it's because he caught COVID. He didn't die, but because he, caught COVID and he had underlying symptoms that he didn't know about, a young, healthy 33-year-old, no health issues that he knew about, hadn't been to the doctor in years.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to be blind forever. And I wonder if he had gotten the vaccination, if it would have affected that tumor so bad. If he'd gone to the doctor and had preventative care and they caught the tumor, he might still have his eyesight. And he's young, facing a lifetime of
33.
blindness.
Yeah.
And so I think, I think young people are really, like, we think we're invincible until we're not, and it's too late. And it's really hard because he could have died. It's like genuinely a miracle that he isn't. And it's not like some stranger. He lives with us now. Like, I see this guy every
Yeah.
day, and
There's no degree of separation. It's right there.
no, yeah, it's not like some stranger that I heard about. It's not Nicki Minaj's like cousin.
Oh God, that
or
was
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, like I think we think that we're gonna be fine when we get it, but really, like, you don't know if you have underlying health conditions that you don't know about. Like,
Mhm.
really, like, even like healthy people are passing away, young people are passing away, kids are passing away, and like the virus is mutating so quickly. And it's becoming more and more contagious. And I think people who like really think that they're going to be okay aren't necessarily thinking about the people that they live with or spend time with. Like, I know you live close to your parents, and like
Yeah, I live at home.
I hope that they, stay safe, because really you're putting them at greater risk by being unvaccinated, living with them.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is this is probably the reason why I haven't gotten it, is because I view it as this is going to be a flu. That's what this is going to be. This isn't going anywhere. This is going to be, from my understanding, what I'm feeling is that this is just going to be a yearly thing. That there's probably going to be another set of shots, and it'll just be like a flu shot. Like, you're going to go get this thing. This is just going to be a virus that we're going to live with. And the fact that, you can still get sick, and you can still transmit it if you're vaccinated. I don't know. I don't have a legitimate reason. And I'm happy both of my parents are vaxxed, which I definitely think they should, because they're in the age group, or getting to the age group where it would be, you know, worthwhile for them to have it. But for younger people, especially I'm 23, statistically, my odds of getting it and having serious effects are are pretty low, which people don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about this is really affecting people 55 and up, really affecting them. There are cases like your friend, unfortunately, and cases where people have underlying conditions and are obese. Nobody wants to talk about obesity and how that is a serious factor in this. And if you are overweight, you should probably be vaccinated. And you should probably be taking extra precautions on top of that, because you are in this group that could be severely affected. Vitamin D. You should be supplementing with vitamin D, but nobody's talking about that.
Are you supplementing with vitamin D?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I take a shit ton of vitamins. I
I
take vitamin D, omega-3. I take a ton of
yeah.
stuff just
You would
to be
probably
healthy.
be okay, but are you willing to like really play a game of risk with your own life and like those around you? Because, yeah, you could still get sick if you're vaccinated, but you won't die, and you're much less likely to transmit it onto other people. So it's like you're putting everyone that you come in contact with at risk too, at more risk,
See,
because
people
people
say
will say that you can have it for weeks and before your body starts to react to
this
it and
is
fight it
yeah.
off, and you can transmit it that entire time.
This is good. Would you say to an obese person, you should go lose weight? Like, if I was sitting here like 100 pounds heavier, would you be like, you should go hit the gym. You should really be trying to lose weight right now
I
because you're putting
wouldn't.
it.
I would not. I would hope that they would maybe like be talking to their
Mhm.
doctor about it. And I think also it depends on like genetics, and it depends on like really what you're predisposed to. And
Yeah.
I don't know that they're not
That's the
already
thing.
doing what they can to keep
That's what
themselves
bothers
safe.
me is because you're actually the first person. I'm so happy because you're the first person that said like, "Oh, you should probably go get vaccinated." I've been waiting. Nobody's ever said that to me. I've been kind of like itching for it, in a good way because I
You're
think
like
that's
having arguments in the shower, like
yeah,
prepping for
preparing
this.
myself like, oh, fucking no. I just think it's fascinating because nobody says that in regards to other things. But if you're a smoker, if you're not supplementing with vitamin D, if you're doing these other things, I'm worried that people are getting this vaccine thinking, oh, this is the end all be all. Like, I don't have to take care of my health. I just have to get the vaccine and I'm going to be okay. And that worries me because this vaccine isn't, 100% safeguard. You can still get sick. You can still die, which nobody wants to talk about these breakthrough cases. They just, because I've talked to a couple people who, are overweight and it's like, oh, I got the vaccine and I'm good now. Like, I'm safe. I'm okay. And it's like, well, you're still at risk. You should be, you should want to take these other steps because your health, your body, your immune system, like these are the first layers of defense. And if you are healthier and active in taking these steps, you're going to have a better chance. This vaccine is great. It's a great preventative. It helps. It does help. I'm not sitting here pretending that it doesn't because it definitely does. But there are other things you could be doing too that I think people are missing, which worries me. And what scares me, I think it's almost like I probably should get vaccinated. I probably should. I don't know if I will. I'm still waiting. I think I'm at this point where I'm kind of nudging back because everyone is nudging so hard. I think the vaccine passport is scary. I think that forcing people to do something is problematic. I get the schools. I think that's an argument could be made for that, but making people get vaccinated to go to a restaurant or to go to a gym or to go to a movie theater, that worries me because I see where that could go and what else that could be used for. And I think forcing people to do things with their bodies is a problem. I don't think that leads anywhere good. And it worries me that people are so on board to do that and so on board to carry around a little card that shows I'm vaccinated, like I'm I'm doing my part. I'm helping people out. I mean, there's sentiment that oh, if you're not vaccinated and you get sick, you shouldn't be able to go to the hospital. You shouldn't be able to get a bed because you're taking a bed from maybe someone who's vaccinated and sick, or taking a bed from someone else who's got something else going on. It's like, where's the compassion with that? What are we doing here? This forced compliance, I think, is what worries me.
I think that that's a very American way of looking at it because we value personal freedom more than we value harming others sometimes. And I think that that's
But
really
is that
that
it though?
I think I think so. I think that really like we should be doing everything we can to stay safe and to keep others safe. Like I think even if you're vaccinated, you should still continue to try to, limit social interactions. Like I think you should try to, keep healthy and stay healthy for yourself and loved ones. I think it's pretty selfish because you're putting other people at higher risk. By being unvaccinated, you're helping transmit this virus. Like you're kind of like in a way being like, well, if I get it, I'll be fine. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can host it, I can pass it on, it's fine. But like other people, might die. And there are breakthrough cases. There are people who, have been vaccinated and are getting it. Usually they have underlying health conditions. And you're significantly less likely to die with it. And I think that that has value. I don't like, I think turning it into like, oh, this is like a freedom thing. Okay, like don't get it, and knowing that like our hospital workers are so overburdened by people who are not vaccinated and that they're sick of it. I'm not saying that people shouldn't get health care. I think you should always get health care. And people aren't able to get health care right now because there's so many unvaccinated people in the hospital, and I think that is horrible. Our healthcare system can't take the strain of taking care of so many unvaccinated people who are so sick. It's not keeping up with it well at all. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't get care. Everybody should get care. And, in saying everybody should get care, that means like people, who have non-life-threatening issues that are still very much so issues. My best friend's just had a seizure. She was in the hospital for 12 hours before she was able to be seen because there's so many people who were not vaccinated who they were taking care of. And absolutely, saving people's life should be, the first priority. And there's serious medical conditions that we still need doctors for also. And doctors really cutting back to, a level of care that's mostly based on if helping prevent people from dying instead of like taking care of, important issues also is scary. It's scary. And I think that we contribute to it. Our actions as individuals build up to who we are as society and society together. We can be people who really are looking out for just ourselves and thinking out what is best for ourselves, or we can be people who look out for everyone around us. And I personally think it's really selfish to not get vaccinated if you're able to. I know that not everybody's able to, but I think a lot of us here are. And it's a tremendous privilege to say, I have this opportunity and I might not take it because I think I'll be fine, knowing that, you put your loved ones and your parents at higher risk. I don't think, any of us want to see our loved ones get hurt. And it's interesting that with this, so many of us are like, well, we'll take our chances,
Well, I don't think it's so much. It's definitely not so much we'll take our chances, right? I There are these other steps that you can take. I think the vaccine is definitely a layer of protection that is beneficial, especially if I don't want to discourage anybody from getting the vaccine. Especially if you're in one of the groups that can be hit hardest by it. I definitely think you should. But younger people, do you need it? I don't know.
Yeah,
I think you could. You could also supplement. You could also exercise. There are these things that have been proven to decrease your odds of getting a severe illness.
at the
People,
same rate as the vaccine. You think these
oh, I don't
preventative
know. I don't
things?
even know if there's enough research on that. I know vitamin D, it's something crazy like 80 or 90% of the people that were in the ICU were vitamin D deficient, which doesn't surprise me because that's most Americans, most people in general don't take vitamin D, and that's been proven to really help your chances. Vitamin D is huge, which is surprising that nobody talks about that. Obesity, 85% of the people, I think it's 85 or 87 of the people that were hospitalized were obese. That's another factor that nobody wants to talk about. My worry is that we're focusing so much on this vaccine that people are ignoring, if you're healthy, that helps too. So get the vaccine and be healthy. That
Totally.
should be something that's preached.
Totally. I think it should be both. I think it should be all of the ways that we can take care of each other.
I don't like the take care of each other shame, I think bothers me because people say that. They say get vaccinated to save grandma, that sentiment that goes around, which is fine. That's important, but that kind of ties into that weird you're kind of trying to, not you necessarily, but like people are trying to guilt trip others into this forced compliance thing. And while it's not necessarily bad because we're in a pandemic and people are dying and like this is a real thing, I don't think forced compliance and mandating things like this is good for society. I think that it's a slippery slope and it leads to bad things. When you say, "Oh, you have to have a card that shows you got this thing in your body to come into this place."
Like, don't you want to keep the restaurant workers safe? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and don't you
But
want to
you
like
can still,
decrease their risk of getting it too?
yeah, but you're decreasing their risk, but it's not removing the risk because if this vaccine you couldn't spread it if you got it, I would say everyone rush out and get it. Like if you weren't transmitting it, if you weren't getting sick from it, but it's just a layer of protection. People are still getting sick with it. People are still dying from being vaccinated. People are getting vaccinated and having pretty severe reactions from the vaccine. Like there are these other factors that people just seem to want to ignore in a weird way and say, okay, now you have to get this thing to go out into public,
In the
which is a
last
weird.
month, they've
Imagine if we
shown in
changed.
the last month they've shown that half of the world's population has gotten at least one of their doses of the vaccination.
That's
So
awesome.
so I think that like at a certain point, like you can say, yes, it's there's side effects or yes, there's this or that, but like really it's about creating enough people who are vaccinated that there's herd immunity. And we haven't gotten that
But
yet.
I think they've said that that's not herd immunity is basically out the window. That this is because you're still transmitting it, you're still conducting it, and you're still transmitting it.
They're saying herd immunity isn't possible because people are choosing not to get vaccinated.
Oh,
And so it's
I hadn't
still
heard that.
getting transmitted at a higher rate than if we had gotten vaccinated. So I think it's still an option. I think it takes folks, getting vaccinated.
Hmm.
And if you're thinking like, okay, forced compliance isn't working, shaming people isn't helping, how would you convince people to get vaccinated knowing that it's an important layer of protection?
I wouldn't if they. I think it's unfortunately or fortunately. I think that it's people's choice. I think at this point in time, you have some diehard people out there that are like, they don't want to get it because they think it's government control. Whatever. There's some wild conspiracies out there about the vaccine. I think at this point, people that have gotten it got it, and people that haven't gotten it probably don't want to get it for whatever reason. I don't see why they have to be forced into getting it. I think that's what makes me uncomfortable.
But
Is that
even before there were these mandates, you still were uncomfortable in not getting it. So I don't think it changed your mind at all.
well, I haven't gotten it because it's probably a combination of those things. But I'm not anti-vaccine. I don't think there's anything wrong with the vaccine. I recognize that it's beneficial, but I recognize the flu shot's beneficial, and I don't get the flu shot. Mainly because I got really sick one time when I took the flu shot, so the flu shot was off the table for me. But I think that people should be allowed to choose. Unfortunately or fortunately, I think that choice, I mean, yeah, makes us American, and I think that's a good thing. I think you see what's going on in Australia right now, where people are rioting with these lockdowns, and it's a big deal because people don't want these restrictions. You can't lock people in their houses and say you can't go outside. And I think people like to imagine that, the US can't devolve into a third world state or shit can't hit the fan here, but it can. And I think forcing people to put things into their body that they don't want to for whatever reason, I think that's a pretty good start downhill into a place we don't want to go. I mean, imagine if you were forcing people like this is not a good comparison and I shouldn't bring this up, but the abortion bill in Texas, not good. People should be allowed to have an abortion. But imagine saying, "Oh, you can't get an abortion." Telling people, I have a problem with telling people what they can and can't do with their body. But that seems to be ignored when it comes to the vaccine. With abortion, it's like, yeah, your choice, my body, my choice. And then it comes to the vaccine, it's like, your body, my choice. And I just think that's a weird. I don't understand why people are. If you have the vaccine, you're protected. You are protected. So I might get you sick, but you still have that layer of protection, and you might get sick from somebody who's also vaccinated. So
It's
you have that
extremely
protection.
less likely, though.
But is it though? Because there's a lot of research coming out that people are still spreading it. There was a prison where the inmates were, it was somewhere here in the States. The prison was 70% vaccinated, and it ran through them. It ran through the
You
inmates.
cannot socially distance in
That's a good
prison.
point. But how
You
many people?
cannot, and there isn't a lot of personal protective equipment in the prisons.
But
And you have like one
you
people.
came from Tacoma
Mm-hmm.
down here to see your parents. You could have had it. You could spread it right now. I could be getting it from you. But that's the thing, right?
It's
We don't want to
so
look,
much less
but we don't want
likely
to look at it
being
that way.
vaccinated.
But it happens. It's not, you're not, people are still spreading it
There's
vaccinated.
no way anyone is completely immune.
Yes.
It's true.
Yeah.
But you're significantly less likely to get it. You're significantly less likely to transmit it. And I think, it really, you can be like, okay, it's my choice. I'm not doing it. And like, maybe you want to call it shaming, but the truth is that you are putting people around you at greater risk by being
Yes.
unvaccinated.
Maybe.
Definitely.
I
You're
think
putting
people
people at greater,
I think
yourself
people
and
that
others.
are obese are putting other people at greater risk. I think people that smoke are putting people around them at risk. There's a lot of things that we do that put people at risk. People that have a beer and people that drunk drive put people at risk. Unfortunately or fortunately, the ability to choose what you do with your body especially and what you do with your life, I think that's important.
until it affects other people.
But
Like,
everything affects other people.
I think that if what you're doing, if your choices are really putting other people at harm, that is the point when government is supposed to intervene,
But then where does that point stop?
when you're not putting other people at harm.
But that's a broad definition. That's a scarily broad definition. Because my right to own a gun puts other people at risk.
Statistically, you and your family have much higher
Statistically, but
risk.
everybody. So should the government be able to take your gun?
I just think that the slippery slope argument is so ridiculous
See,
because you're
people say
comparing
that,
an apples
yes.
and oranges.
People
Like
say that, but that's how the
your
slope gets
argument,
started.
your argument is like based off of like flawed rationale because you're not comparing two things. Like getting the vaccine and abortion are not similar. Super sorry. Like
No, I
they're not
recognize that.
similar.
Yeah.
And I think that like it completely ignores like the nuances around them. It completely ignores like, my body, my choice is really something that women are still fighting for today. And so being like, no, the vaccine's totally similar. It's like when women's rights movement compare themselves to like Black Lives Matter. It's totally different. Stop doing that. Like these like arguments are not helpful for one another. They're not. They're not similar. The comparison does not make sense.
But it's fair to extrapolate, especially considering, okay, vaccine, getting it, you have to get it. Guns, well, you have to give up your gun because that puts people at risk. People don't like to acknowledge that to get to like where China is, where you have these social credit systems and you're being watched by the government and censored and you can just be ghosted in the middle of the night, you have to take these progressive steps that erode your rights. The Bill of Rights, people don't have rights. That's not a real concept. Your right to abortion, your right to own a gun, those are all man made things that people died to get. And when you start to erode the fundamental foundation of those things, while it seems small and it seems just because the eroding of rights always starts that way, it becomes a slippery slope. So, where we start with the vaccine, then we could go to guns, then maybe we go to abortion, then maybe we hit all these other pillars, and then people are being monitored when they leave their house.
That's like a really
That's a really
ridiculous argument.
yeah,
That's a really ridiculous.
it's only
like,
ridiculous because we're at
thinking.
step 1 right now. That's the only reason why it's ridiculous. Because if I told you, okay, you have to get a vaccine, and then next year I said, okay, there's a new variant of the flu, you have to get the flu shot. And then the next year I said, okay, well, gun violence, like the CDC is trying to do, state it as an endemic. Okay, well, now you have to give up your guns because so many people are dying from gun violence that we're just going to take all the guns. Okay. Then the next year we turn into Australia and it's like, okay, another pandemic starts. You can't leave your house. You don't get to go anywhere. You're going to stay in your house and you're going to social distance. We're going to lock down. It sounds crazy, but these are the steps that society can take. And it sounds crazy because we're at step 1. So I'm saying you have to do this thing to go somewhere else. And that seems small. And it seems like a good thing because you're doing it for the betterment of society. So people are like, yeah, let's do that. Let's force vaccinations because it's going to help everybody.
Let's back all the way up.
Okay.
Because that was like a ridiculous progression.
Okay.
So you think that it's okay to say that like kids in school need to be vaccinated?
Yeah.
And like including the COVID vaccination.
No, because
this vaccine is totally different than all the other vaccines.
This vaccine, there's research that is coming out and research that's being done that kids under 12 especially, it's not good for them. There was a study that just came out that, oh God, I'm not going to do it justice, that it has adverse effects on teenage boys, that it's not good for them, that they should not be taking this vaccine at that age. I don't know about anything older than that, but I know that young children, probably not. I think that's why the FDA hasn't said that kids below 12 should be taking the vaccine. No. But if colleges want to mandate it, like they did, I had to get the meningococcal one because OSU had an outbreak. And so I rushed out. I got my vaccine because I didn't want to catch that. I think that's fine. But saying, hospitals saying, oh, if hospital workers don't get vaccinated, they're fired, or airline industries doing that, or restaurants, I think forcing people to do that is very uncomfortable because it can be extrapolated to other things even if we don't want to recognize that now. People saying you have to do, people forcing you to put something in your body is a really weird concept to me.
But
It's a really
it's
weird
been
concept.
happening your entire life. You know, you went to public schools.
True,
They
but you don't
forced you
have
to get
to,
these
I don't have to get the
vaccinations.
meningococcal vaccine to go to Target. I don't have, which is way deadlier than COVID is. You catch meningitis or any of that or polio, that you're going to have a way worse time. But you don't have to have those vaccines to go anywhere. We do, luckily, most of us. I don't have to have the malaria. I don't have to take malaria pills, but that still runs rampant. Malaria kills hundreds of thousands of people a year. Runs rampant. But I don't have to have that to go into Target. Nobody's saying, oh, you have to have the flu shot to go on a plane, but we're doing that with COVID. And I think that's a slippery, I believe that's a slippery first step. Whether it's warranted or not, forcing people to put something in your body is a weird thing. That's a weird thing. Especially something that's not on par. Polio and COVID are not on the same playing field. By far. Polio and malaria are not on the same playing field. But we're mandating it with COVID. I think that's weird. I think that's uncomfortable.
I think that there's like a lot more things that we're forced to do than we realize, you know, whether
So but do we want to, is that a justification? That
it's
seems like a weird way to
I think like
justify
a
doing
global
that.
pandemic where we're seeing, you know, millions of people die, it makes sense to ask people to get vaccinated when people are
Ask them,
choosing not
absolutely.
to. I feel like we're on this scale where we're still seeing, you know, hundreds of thousands of people die every year. I think that we have to look at like what else can we do to keep our communities safe. Like I think it is really about keeping each other safe, keeping
But
ourselves and others
is
safe.
it? We let
Yeah.
people smoke. We let people smoke. That's a one-way sentence to dying. Heart disease kills way more people than COVID does. You can go hit McDonald's 24 hours a day. So if it's keeping people safe, why are we not doing that with everything else? With these things that kill way more people than COVID does. Alcohol kills more people than COVID. I'm sitting here drinking a beer. The argument of, oh, we need to keep people safe ends when we realize that's only being extrapolated to COVID right now and the vaccine.
I don't think it is. I mean, I think that we have laws against like drunk driving because we are hoping to keep people safe. Like I think we have laws like, about different things that really are focused on keeping people safe.
But tobacco, I could go buy a pack of smokes right now. And there's no upside to that. That doesn't do something good and kill me at the same time. It only kills you. But we allow people to make that choice because we think if you're an adult,
If
you
you
should be able to make your own
if you
choices.
smoke cigarettes and we're not in the same room while you're smoking, you're not killing me. You could potentially kill me or others if you are unvaccinated and are sick and don't know it.
But that's so many other things.
Like
I could potentially kill you with anything, with a gun. I could potentially kill somebody with my car by accidentally falling asleep at the wheel. Like that, the argument of, oh, you have to do this to watch out for everyone else. I get that it's a good thing. I get that that's why this is such a solid argument for it, is because you're on the side of social justice and we want to help people. We want to take care of people, which is a good thing. That is inherently good. But forcing people to do something is not inherently good. I think that is a step in the wrong direction, regardless of the reasons. And while it might seem good for this, I think people always forget that the tools that are used on your side today are often used against you tomorrow. And my biggest go to with that is censorship, right? A lot of people think it's good that we're censoring QAnon and flat earth theories and all these crazy conspiracies, Pizza Gate. They think it's good that we're censoring that. And maybe it is, because those conspiracies, people have done bad things in the name of those conspiracies. But what they don't realize is that if this censorship was around when Martin Luther King was alive, he would have been censored. He wouldn't have been able to say whatever he wants online. They would have locked him up. Like these
he
tools.
was censored often. People
Exactly.
didn't do that and he was jailed.
He was. And he would have been on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram. These platforms would not have allowed him to speak. And yet they're fine with not allowing these other people to speak
I
because they
think
don't agree
that
with their
like the
message.
civil rights movement isn't one that's
It's different.
super
It's
comparable
different.
with COVID vaccinations.
It's but I'm trying to make these comparisons that these steps that seem good can be used for bad reasons. And so if you allow them, you open the floodgate to, okay, 9/11, we open the door to all this surveillance on people, on Americans. We open the door to the NSA spying on whoever they want, whenever they want. And those powers have only grown from 9/11. They weren't there before, but we opened the gate and they grow. If you give the government a power, that power rarely gets taken back. It only gets expanded on.
So by following your logic and saying people don't have to be vaccinated at all, it's fine if other people die. Like you're kind of saying it's okay if millions more people die so that I don't have to be inconvenienced or do something that I don't want to do.
Would you say, I think that people, if you have the choice that you can go out and buy a pack of cigarettes and smoke yourself to death, you should be allowed to have the choice not to get the vaccine.
But smoking yourself to death does not kill the people around you.
Okay. But you are vaccinated. So you are more protected. So your odds of dying are significantly lower. Yes, you might get sick. You might have flu-like symptoms. But you're vaccinated. So your odds of dying are severely cut. So you're pretty much safe. So the only one that could theoretically really be hurt is someone who's not vaccinated, like me. So
And
then,
there's a lot of kids who are not able to get vaccinated.
and kids are not really affected by COVID. That's
Kids
something
are totally dying today. There are little kids
very,
dying from
very
COVID.
rarely. Babies, very rarely are young kids dying. Statistically, very, very rarely.
So what about people who do have underlying health conditions?
Get
Aren't we
vaccinated. Absolutely.
but people who with underlying health conditions, aren't we saying to them, you are expendable because people who feel like they are healthy don't need to get vaccinated. So your life is expendable. To old folks, you're like, okay, you could totally
but
die, and that's okay because we don't
Okay.
want to like undermine American views of rights.
Are these older people vaccinated? Because then their odds of dying, like you said, are way lower. Their odds of dying are way lower, right? That's what you just said with being vaccinated. So why does it matter if I'm not vaccinated? Because they're protected.
Because
They're
you're
good.
helping this, you're like volunteering to be a host for COVID.
I
You're
would say that.
like,
I would say that if you couldn't still spread it if you were vaccinated. If you could only spread it if you were unvaccinated, you should get vaccinated.
if everybody in the United States was vaccinated, there would be no hosts for COVID to continue passing it along to. Like it would be significantly less likely. It would if
It
we
would
were
definitely
all,
still be spread.
If we were all vaccinated, it would stop spreading. It would stop
But
having
that's
hosts.
not true. There's nothing backing that though. There's no scientific evidence that it would just stop.
Absolutely. That's why the CDC is recommending we all get vaccinated so that it stops spreading.
But it won't stop spread. I have not heard. We might have to fact check that. I've not heard that it would not. If theoretically, if everybody in the world was vaccinated, it what how? Because you can still contract it and spread it if you're vaccinated to other vaccinated people. So then we would just be spreading it amongst the vaccinated. So while most people might not be
significantly
dying,
less likely. Like
but
we're cutting off
you
this
keep
like
saying
beast
that.
at the leg.
You keep saying that, but it's still happening. But it's still happening. If it wasn't happening, completely different argument. Not that I would still say that you should force people to get vaccinated, but I would be like, yeah, everyone should go get vaccinated because you can't spread it. Even if you could still get sick from it and just not spread it, that's great. And what about if you have antibodies? What if you got COVID and beat it? Those antibodies are 6 to 13 times more effective than the vaccine. Should you still have to go get the vaccine? What about all the people that had it and beat it? You have natural immunity now. Should they still have to get vaccinated?
I think so.
Why? But they have a protection more effective than the vaccine.
They have a protection, but also, the protection is only going to be lasting in your body for so long, is what the scientists have said. Like the
But that's the
CDC
same-
still recommends people who have gotten COVID get the vaccine, and I will absolutely follow people who have medical credentials.
Absolutely.
For in this
Absolutely.
work.
I'm not recommending anything to anybody, but 6 to 13 times more coverage sounds a hell of a lot better, but
6 to 13 times more coverage than 95%. That's a
they've come out
statistical anomaly,
they've come out that natural immunity is 6 to 13 times more effective than the vaccine.
which is 95% effective.
Effective. So why should they still have to get
How
it?
can it be more than 100%?
Listen, I'm just telling you what the research. This is real though. If you're vaccinated and your odds of dying are super low because you're vaccinated, why does it matter if I'm not vaccinated?
Because you can still get
Spread
it,
it.
transmit it.
Yes,
Yeah.
but you can still get it and transmit it.
At significantly less likely rates.
But what does that mean? What if you were that 1 in 10 that still gets it and spreads it? So then you still spread it.
To far fewer people than if you're unvaccinated.
But you're still protected. You're still good. You're not going to die. Your argument was based on we don't want people to die. You're not going to die. People that are vaccinated
I shouldn't
statistically
get sick because someone else is.
Okay, but I shouldn't there shouldn't be kids dying in Africa.
But if I could prevent that, I would. Wouldn't you? If you could prevent kids in Africa from dying, wouldn't you do it? If you could prevent your family members and other people from dying, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
So why doesn't that rationale carry over into vaccinations?
But I am taking steps, right? I exercise very rigorously. I'm very healthy, thankfully. I supplement with vitamin D. I'm taking these other steps. I'm in a group statistically that has a very low chance of dying from COVID. Both of my parents are vaccinated. Everyone I come into contact with is vaccinated. I'm not traveling. I am taking steps. But I think that forcing someone to put something into their body, I don't think that is something that we should be condoning. I think that's regardless of whatever reason there is. That's a problem.
So regardless of millions of people dying.
See, this is the thing that I'm going to try to say this without sounding like an asshole, which I feel like is going to be hard because I'm thinking it sounds kind of asshole-y, but millions of people die. That's life. Millions of people die from malaria when we have preventative measures for that, but we don't ship them over to Africa where people are dying way more than COVID. Malaria is a big deal in Africa. Like kids are dying by the hundreds of thousands. Nobody's shipping over malaria medicine to them. Nobody's helping them out.
So your rationale is like, let them die from COVID?
No. My rationale is I should not have any ability to look at you and say, you have to do this to go out into society. Because that is...
Even though you're putting people at greater risk.
But that's not weird to you at all? The idea of saying you have to do this thing to go out, that's not uncomfortable?
In a global pandemic, I hope that we are keeping those most vulnerable safe. I hope that, having been a restaurant worker, I hope that we are keeping them safe. And even having no relation to people who are running cinemas and stuff. I hope that we keep them safe. I hope that we're doing everything we can to keep people safe. I hope that we're doing everything that we can.
Are you supplementing with vitamin D or anything?
I'm not taking vitamin D, but I drink a lot of OJ.
That's vitamin C.
Oh,
vitamin D is from the sun.
Oh, well, I see the sun a lot
too.
too.
But that's another preventative measure that you could be taking to help other people.
And if, I'm happy to take vitamin D. That's not an issue. I'm not taking horse pills, but I'm happy to take vitamin D.
Well, I'm going to work on you. I'm going to get you.
Just so you can hear where my level of crazy
by
is.
By the end of this, I'm going to get you on we'll go swing by Nielsen Feed and pick up some wormers.
Probably not. But, I try. I do what I can.
I'm going to definitely look into that because...
I definitely stay healthy.
Yes.
I definitely work on those things. And I do take a lot of precautions. I socially isolate more than most anybody I know.
But you say that, and yet you traveled here from Tacoma.
I drove in the car by myself.
Didn't stop at a gas station or grab any food or do anything in between.
I did feed myself.
Okay.
It's true.
Okay.
In my car.
I was going to be impressed if you didn't.
Not in a restaurant, but in my car.
But you did come into contact with people.
It's impossible for me to not come into contact with people.
Yeah.
And I came into far fewer contact with people in my car by myself driving 12 hours than even if I had stayed at home and went to the grocery store.
Yes, but what I'm saying is and
I wore a mask and I used hand sanitizer. I take lots of precautions to keep myself and those around me safe.
Yes, and that's great. And we should all be taking precautions, but forcing people to do things is uncomfortable. Because what if tomorrow, I know you don't like these extrapolations, but what if tomorrow I said, okay, what if we started forcing people to have abortions? That would be really uncomfortable.
You're being so
But
ridiculous.
it's only ridiculous because we're not there yet. Right? China has a policy, or they did, where you could only have one child. Imagine being forced that you could only have one kid. That if you had a second child, well, you're gonna have an abortion.
I
And that's
just
crazy, but that's a real thing. That's what is real in China, or was real before they lifted it, but that was a real thing. And do you think that that just came out of nowhere? It comes from taking steps and forcing things on the like I get that it sounds crazy because it is. And the idea that we would force people to get abortions here sounds crazy. But to me, it also sounds crazy that we would rip families apart and keep kids in cages. And it sounds crazy that we would not give Native Americans the vaccine to smallpox. Like, there are things that sound crazy to us because we're not in that realm, but to people that are in that realm, it doesn't sound so crazy. Like, these steps, they don't sound. I bet in Australia, when they had guns, the idea that, oh, the government's going to come and take all your guns, that probably sounded crazy. That sounds crazy to me now, and I know they did it. And then they went and did it. Everything sounds crazy until you get to the point of, oh shit, it's not crazy anymore because it's happening.
I don't think it has to sound like so crazy. Like I don't think asking people to, get the vaccine so that they're putting the essential workers at lower risk sounds crazy.
Yeah,
I don't think
no, I
that
get
sounds
that. I get
crazy.
that. Does forced abortion sound crazy?
Yes.
But that
And
hap-
it is crazy.
and
Like
it
that's
happens.
crazy.
It does happen in the
I
world.
just feel like that's not comparable to like in a global pandemic asking people to get mandated, like
You're right.
asking people to get
But does the
vaccinated.
government listening to your cell phone 24/7 sound crazy? Because prior
It
to
sounds
9/11,
boring.
it sounds
It sounds boring as hell.
uncomfortable to me, but prior to 9/11, that would have been crazy. And here we are today, and that's exactly what happens. Constant surveillance. And we are in this constant surveillance state because of what happened during 9/11, when there was this scary moment in the world and people were willing to erode some of their freedoms to feel protected and feel safe, because when people are afraid and when there is an imminent danger, that's when the most damage can be done, because people are willing to do anything to feel safe again. They're willing to give up anything to feel comfortable, to feel protected, to feel like somebody is watching out for them. And that's when the damage gets done. And that's when the foundation for later damage is laid. Is during these times. Because if the world was going great, imagine 4 years ago, right? No COVID. And they said everyone has to have a flu vaccine to go anywhere outside of their house. That would sound pretty crazy. That would be pretty crazy. For me, I would think that's crazy. Wouldn't you? If they said just out of the blue, everyone has to get vaccinated with the flu shot, or you can't leave your house. That would be pretty crazy, but that's essentially what we're doing here.
In a global pandemic.
Yes, but that is
Okay.
still, but
So what you're
still,
saying is you think that the government is perpetuating mass fear to
no,
like pull one over on
no,
us
I
during
did
this
not say
or
that.
like take
I did
advantage.
not say
So
that.
when you're talking about the government like perpetuating this fear and like fear
I did
mongering to
not
strip
say their
away
fear. I didn't say
freedom.
any of that. I said that this first step, though it doesn't sound crazy,
Well,
and though it's
comparing it to like 9/11 and like,
no,
we're
I'm telling you what happened. We weren't being spied on with mass surveillance before 9/11. There was no TSA. We weren't scanning our we
there
didn't have
was TSA
Yeah, but it
before
wasn't, you could
9/11.
just get on a plane. There was no flying was completely different before 9/11.
There were still security checks.
Not anywhere near the level of security that we
It's
had today.
definitely different.
Yeah,
But I am wondering why you're saying that if you're not comparing the two.
because it's what was pre 9/11 and post 9/11 is completely different. The Patriot Act opened the door for these things that nobody saw coming. For these things that nobody saw coming, for the level of surveillance that everyone should be uncomfortable with and is when they know what is really happening. But that started when people were afraid, when we had been attacked, and people were willing to give up anything to be safe.
And so you feel like
I feel like
people
this is a step.
mandating the vaccine is
Is a
going to
step.
lead to all of those things.
I think it will lead to something bad in the future, and we will look on it like we do with that. Like, oh wow, now that I'm not saying necessarily that it's going to lead to forced abortions or anything, but I think people in China probably didn't think that whatever started with that led to forced abortions, or that line of thinking is a real thing, but people don't like to look at that. They say, "Oh, this isn't crazy. This thing we're doing now, it's just you're just giving up one thing. You're forcing people to do one thing. What's the problem with that?" And maybe there's not a problem with that. But then tomorrow it can become two things, and the next day it can become three things. And maybe it's not the next day, maybe it's 20 years.
I think when we're talking about vaccines, it's different than the rest of the
But
things that you're talking
why is
about.
it it's only different because you're on the side of the
We
vaccine.
already get so many vaccines. Our dogs and animals get so many vaccines
Yep.
before they can do any, like,
None that
we're in a
make it so you
culture.
can't leave the house. There's no vaccine right now that's on the market that you have to go into a supermarket or to go sit down at a restaurant. There's none.
You don't need a vaccine to go into a supermarket. They're talking about things where like eating at a restaurant or
Okay?
going to
But there's
movies.
no vaccine, there's no other vaccine requirement for any of that. Right? So we have all these vaccines, which are great. I'm not anti-vaccine. I have all of them. But forcing people to get one to go into a place is weird. And this is the first time we're doing that. This is the first step. And I think it could. And you know what the government is capable of because your people have experienced it. My people have experienced it. Anybody that lives in this country has experienced what the government is capable of. And I think giving the government more power should be alarming. And allowing them to say you have to do this to be a part of society is a problem. Because who knows where it could lead? And while it might seem crazy today, might not seem crazy in 10 years when it's happening. When they're saying, "Oh, you can only have one child." And if you're pregnant with a second, I guess it's abortion or adoption. You don't get to keep that second child.
Your line of reasoning is ridiculous. First of
You
all,
say
that's
that. You
ridiculous.
say that
I
until it
do.
happens.
Okay.
If you were in China, but if you were in China and they said you can only have one child, you'd be like, "This is crazy." But that's the law. That's the law in China. It was. They lifted it because their population was struggling, and they had way more men than women because people didn't want daughters because you could only have one child. But that sounds crazy. But that happened.
I just think that
I get it. I
there's
get it. You don't
so
see it going there, and that's okay.
I do not.
That's
I
okay.
don't think that's like a rational comparison. I think, what I do see happening without these mandates is that people aren't going to be vaccinated. This is something that it is definitely going to be endemic. This is something we're going to deal with decades because people were selfish and didn't do what they could to protect themselves and others.
But what if everyone gets vaccinated and it's still around for the next 15 years?
And we're dying at much less rates. I think that that's a much more preferable outcome than millions of people continuing to die and spreading it to people who don't have the option of getting the vaccine, like kids.
But kids statistically aren't dying at high rates, at
So, are
anywhere
you
near high
going to tell a
rates.
parent of a kid that's just died from
I'm gonna say,
COVID,
"Oh my
like,
God,
oh,
I'm so sorry."
but your kid doesn't matter compared
Nobody's saying
to
they
like
don't
my
matter.
freedom? You are. You're saying that they don't matter because it's statistically less likely.
Why is your freedom? Why do you get the right to force somebody to do something? Why that's not within your freedom. With the Either way, we're eroding somebody's freedom, which isn't good. The
to
ability to
to
force,
prevent millions of people
but
from
it
dying.
doesn't matter what it's for.
I think it does. I think it's not in the same level as other things. Like, we're preventing millions of people from dying. We're not like being like, okay,
Then,
everybody has
okay,
abortions
we
now.
can
Like,
do
that's
that, but
not the
then we should
same.
force people to exercise. We should force people not to smoke cigarettes. We should force people not to drink alcohol. We should force all these other things that kill way more people. Why are we not forcing them to do that? If this is about saving lives, we should force people to give up their guns. We should force people to eat healthy. We should shut down every fast food restaurant across the country. I mean, all these things kill way more people. Way more. We're talking tenfold.
I think it's different when you're talking about individual freedoms that will only harm you, and when you're talking about things that will harm many
But
more
obesity will
people.
harm multiple. If you are obese and you contract COVID, you're not only more likely to die, but you'll take up a bed, which could prevent someone who's vaccinated from getting a bed that needs it. You are affecting other people if you're obese. You are affecting other people if you're involved in a gang or if you are out drinking because you don't know what could happen. You might accidentally get in your car and drive and hit a family of five. There are these other things that affect other people, though we don't want to look at it like that.
We've created lots of laws against drunk driving. We've created lots of
There's no laws
campaigns against
against
it.
fast food.
I mean, I think that there have been some laws and implementation around like serving sizes and things like
But
that. And I
if the
think like fast
problem,
food isn't like, if you eat and you decide to eat a lot of fast food every day, you're still only harming yourself. You're not potentially killing grandma. You're not.
but if grandma's vaccinated, I'm not potentially killing her.
You are,
But
because
she's
elders,
vaccinated.
even if they are vaccinated, are still more likely to
But
pass
you just
away
said
from COVID than other things.
you're way less likely to
Yes,
die if you're
and if you
vaccinated.
have pre-existing health conditions, it's still a possibility. And I
Okay,
think that their lives matter. I think that they
nobody's
do.
saying that they don't. But you can't force somebody to put something in their body.
You're exactly saying their lives matter less than my right to not have this vaccination that could potentially, if I take it, prevent COVID from carrying on and changing and using you as a host and creating other
But
hosts.
all those things happen still if you're if listen, this would be a completely different conversation if being vaccinated prevented those things.
I'm not sure it would. Like, your line of thinking makes me think that even if it did prevent COVID entirely, you would still be like, my individual right to not get vaccinated is more important than people with underlying health
Oh,
conditions
I
that
would
would
still
still
absolutely I
still
would still argue that we shouldn't force people to get vaccinated. I would go get vaccinated, but I would still argue that you shouldn't force people because that's the hill that I would die on is forcing people to put something in their bodies very uncomfortable.
that's the hill that you maybe wouldn't die on, but other people would be because of your choices.
But people are dying because we have guns. People die again. There are these things that kill
And
way more people than
we have
COVID,
created laws around gun safety. Are
but
they
we still
working?
let
Are
people
they
have guns.
stronger? Sure. And I'm not against people having guns. I am against people being selfish at the harm of
But
other
why is it
people.
selfish?
Because you're intentionally doing something that you know will harm other people if you
But
catch
do you
COVID.
though? See, this is what I'm worried about is this like this forced you have to do this thing. Like you're sitting here not I get you're coming
I'm
from a
telling
great
you,
place.
you should.
Yes, but you're
I'm
like
telling
you
you, you
should get, you're
should.
gonna kill grandma if you don't. You should go get vaccinated.
I
You're
think
gonna
you
kill
might.
people. You're selfish if you
I
don't get.
I
But
think it is
that's no, I
selfish.
get that. But that's weird. Like that's not a good thing. We shouldn't be wanting to promote that in society.
In a global pandemic where millions of people are dying, I think we should promote that.
That's a scary thing. That freaks me. That freaks me out more than the flat Earth QAnon conspiracy theories. Because that line of thinking, that's what takes away people's freedom. That's what takes away people's right to free speech. That's what censors people. That I get you don't want to look 10 steps ahead, but when you start eroding personal freedom, like that's what everyone in this country, if your ancestors were here, that's what they died for, was the right for you to choose your
Unfortunately,
personal
you do not
freedom.
have the right to tell me what my ancestors did or did not die for. So
Okay.
don't play that card with me.
Okay, let's
Do
not.
not.
Okay. Let's
That's completely unacceptable.
let's not I wasn't talking about you specifically. We're on a podcast here and I know your mom and she's white and you don't let's not get defensive. We're just having a conversation here.
Because it's frustrating
Okay,
for
yes, but don't I get that other people might have said that to you, but don't just assume that I'm my ancestors weren't from here, but I still said that. This is that's we don't have to get defensive about it.
I absolutely will be
Let me
defensive
say
if you are saying something that is offensive. That's
but
rational.
that wasn't supposed to be offensive.
It was.
Okay, but you could say, "Hey, that's kind of offensive."
You don't get to dictate how I respond to offensive things though.
Okay, we don't have to go down this path. What I meant was America was founded on the principle that we all get to enjoy that is personal freedom.
Okay, well, that's ridiculous when we had slaves for over 500 years.
Okay, but
Right? That's not personal freedom at all.
okay, but the right to freedom, the pursuit of freedom, right? We don't have slaves today, thankfully. We are much better today. I mean, we could nitpick all the horrible things that we have done throughout history. because there's no shortage. But the founding principle of this country was personal freedom. And we're closer to that than we've ever been. We're not perfect. I hope we get there someday. But I think forcing people to do things that they don't want to do takes a step backward rather than a step forward. And I think you're completely right. I think we should look out for one another and we should care about people, and we do in a lot of ways and we don't in a lot of other ones that I think is crazy. But forcing anyone to do something they're not comfortable with worries me as a person, because I don't think you should be able to force someone to do something, because that's how you get in uncomfortable situations with people. When you say you don't have a choice with your body, you don't get to decide regardless of the reason. That worries me. And yes, maybe this is a good time to use that power. Maybe it is for a great cause. Maybe it is for the betterment of society. Maybe it wouldn't go anywhere bad. Maybe they would just do it with the vaccine and we would knock it out and we could get back to our lives. And I would be, if that is how it would go and we could just move on from this and start getting back to normal and making real progress, I would be all for that in a heartbeat. But I don't really trust the government because of the things that I've heard that they've done and I've known that they've done. And giving the government more power to decide people's lives scares me.
They already have this power. We're not giving them more power.
They don't have the power. That's why they're kind of putting the squeeze on companies to do it. They're mandating it for their employees, but this has never been done. And I think I just maybe I'm too skeptical, and I would grant that. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm trying to look 10 steps ahead, but I'm actually running with some crazy idea that it's going to be some nefarious purpose that I mean, I've like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, things that the government has done that's super shitty that freaks me out. Maybe I'm too jaded from that, and that is entirely possible. But letting them have the power to force people to do things freaks me out because the government, these people in Congress, like they don't give a shit about the people. Maybe if I thought they did, or if they actually cared about people, or Biden actually gave a fuck, I would be like, okay, I trust that. Like maybe if Obama was up there saying this, saying, hey, we have to do this, we have to get vaccinated, we have to take charge, maybe I would be more inclined to be like, yeah, okay.
Obama has come out and said we
Yeah,
have to
but
get vaccinated.
he's I meant like
And like
in the time of 2016.
you think that like half of the global population has gotten vaccinated and that they were wrong to do so?
No. I think that's great. But they chose to do that. And the other half is choosing not to. And so now the half that chose to, forcing the half that chose not to, that just worries me. And again, maybe I'm
But it like
skeptical.
worries you more than knowing that people are dying from this. It worries you more than knowing that
It
millions
worries
of
me
people are dying
equally.
from
It
this.
worries me equally. I'm not willing to force those people to do it. I'm also not willing to force them not to.
I
Like I
think
think
like
people
you're
should
putting your
choose.
ideology before people's lives, and that the real consequences of your ideology means millions of people die. And
Maybe,
that's
but if I know
really sad.
this is my only opinion or my personal opinion, but if, you know, if I died, God forbid, knock on wood, I I might say, okay, get vaccinated, but I still wouldn't say you should force people to get vaccinated.
You see so many people videoing from their literal hospital
Yeah,
beds begging people to get vaccinated.
yes. Do I think that you should be vaccinated? Yeah, go get vaccinated if you want to. If you want to. I just think it's weird. The forced compliance is uncomfortable. And the guilt trips and the incentives with $50 Target gift cards or $100 whatever, $25 Starbucks cards, it's uncomfortable. And I get it might be coming from a good place,
I
but
wonder
it's
if you
uncomfortable.
lose someone close to you from COVID, if you'll feel the same.
God forbid that that doesn't happen. Maybe we'll address it. God, I hope that doesn't happen.
I do too,
Yeah,
but
no,
I'm
I know, no, I
saying, like,
know. I was just,
yeah,
I hope that doesn't happen, but you're right. I mean, it's all experience based. And maybe I would. Maybe I would sit here and say, we have to get everyone, we got to do whatever it takes to force them. but even the idea of forcing people to do something, it just does not. And I don't know. I can't sit here and tell you 100% why. But the idea of forcing someone, saying you have to, me. I mean, why would I have that power? Why should the government have that? Forcing someone to do something just doesn't sit right with me.
Even though we do that with so many other things, from carrying
We do,
license
we
around, getting
do,
permits before you
we
build,
do.
like getting vaccinations before you go to school. Like
But
there's so many things that
this
we
is a big
force people
step.
to do.
This is a big step. We have never forced anyone to do something like this. Like this is a big moment. And how this plays out will be I mean, this whole pandemic is a big moment. Is a big learning lesson. But this is a first step. This at this level with these restrictions, this is a big step. And I want people to look critically at any forced compliance and at any direction that we go. And I'm 23. I don't have any answers. I don't have life figured out for shit. So maybe I'm completely in the wrong and maybe my opinion will be swayed. Maybe I'll look back and think I was in the right. I don't know, but I know that in this moment the idea of forcing someone to do something scares me. Just like that, I know this isn't a good comparison, but and I'm not comparing it, but the Texas abortion thing, that scares the fuck out of me. I feel like we're making these steps that the government and people in the government are trying to force decisions on other people. And I think across the board, we just have to be very, very, very careful with that. We just have to be careful. And I don't know. I might be on the wrong side of history with this one. That is entirely possible. I'm just I'm just a kid doing a podcast. Like I don't have shit. We talked about ivermectin and the horse dewormer. I mean, I don't have shit figured out. But from my limited perception and my skepticism of the government, I just I just think we should move carefully because when people are afraid, they will do anything not to be afraid. And that's when we can get into trouble. I think we can leave it on that. We had a very, very good. That was a heated, but I I did really enjoy talking with you, and you did make me question some things, and I definitely have things to think about. I definitely want to think critically about where I stand on this and why I feel this way. And I hope I didn't hurt your feelings or anything with anything that was said. I hope you enjoyed coming on maybe a little bit too. You don't think I'm some crazy. You might think I'm a crazy horse dewormer guy, but I can live with that.
I You definitely did not hurt my feelings. And I do kind of think you're a conspiracy
Okay,
theorist.
I can live with that.
And I will definitely look up letters.
Yeah, the emails.
I'll look up
I
the
gotta look up
emails.
the emails too now because maybe I am, I can't see the forest for the trees. Maybe I'm too close to things, which is entirely possible. I've talked to a lot of very interesting and fun people on this thing, and it's easy to get lost in the forest online today. I can completely admit that. So, and I'm the first to say that I've gone down rabbit holes and been like, Nick, what are you doing here? You gotta get off YouTube for a couple days because life is crazy. But yeah, really, thank you for coming on. We did 3 hours, so we've been in here for a minute.
That sounds like a lot of fun editing for
Yes,
you.
worth it. They've all been worth it. Yeah. Okay, Samantha, thank you so much. Really, I really enjoyed talking with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks, guys.